Right, it's 11 o'clock. We're live.
Hello, and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Thursday, July 3rd. We are back, and thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, Jon Elmer, Asa Winstanley, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 636 of Israel's genocide in Gaza. Coming up, analyst Helena Cobban will join us to talk about the fallout from the recent Israeli aggression against Iran, including its impact on the situation in Gaza, the region, and geopolitics. Later on in the program, Jon will break down the latest from the resistance in Gaza, focusing on the ongoing second battle of Khan Yunis. But first, let's take a look at the news. Here's a brief summary of some of the latest developments this week in Palestine. Israel has bombarded areas across Gaza this week, killing 630 Palestinians and wounding more than 2,300 between June 25th and July 2nd in airstrikes, tank shellings, and by snipers, in attacks on residential buildings, tent shelters, cafes, and at U.S.-run so-called aid distribution sites. The Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza said today, Thursday, July 3rd, that 118 Palestinians were killed and 581 injured since Wednesday evening, including 12 people killed and 49 injured at the U.S. and Israeli-backed aid centers, it added. Since late May, when operations at these U.S.-Israeli sites began, 652 starving Palestinians have been killed trying to obtain food aid. 24 people were killed on Wednesday trying to obtain a box of food. We'll have more on the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation in a few minutes. The United Nations Humanitarian Office stated on June 30th that the Israeli military had issued yet another displacement order for people in areas of Jabalia and Gaza City in northern Gaza, affecting at least 150,000 Palestinians, and followed other orders in central Gaza just days before. People are being pushed into overcrowded areas where thousands of others are already staying, the UN adds. These spaces lack shelter, water, and sewage systems, as well as adequate medical facilities, and they are being bombed. On Tuesday, July 1st, at least 17 Palestinians were killed when Israel bombed a building housing forcibly displaced families in the Zaytun neighborhood of Gaza City. Mahmoud Basal, the spokesperson for Gaza's civil defense, said that Israeli forces bombed 25 homes in Gaza City on Tuesday alone. Basal added that the Israeli raids resulted in the deaths of 70 people that day, including 11 people waiting for aid, 12 children, and 14 women, in addition to more than 200 wounded, some of whom are in critical condition. Euromed Human Rights Monitor said that 5 people, including 2 children, were killed when Israeli airstrikes attacked the tents of displaced people in Al-Mawasi, west of Khan Yunis in southern Gaza, also on Tuesday. Al-Mawasi is where Israel has ordered Palestinians in the north to flee. Journalist Nahed Hajjaj documented the aftermath of Tuesday's attacks from the Al-Ahli Arab Hospital in Gaza City and spoke to a 10-year-old boy, Zain, who is taking care of his wounded younger siblings. That was a clip by reporter Nahed Hajjaj in Gaza City on Tuesday. On Monday, June 30th, Israel bombed the crowded Baqa cafe on the seaside in Gaza City, killing more than 30 Palestinians, including children, and those gathering for a child's birthday party. The cafe was a gathering spot for families who sought a moment of rest from the bombings and for journalists who needed internet access and a place to charge their phones. A survivor of the attack, Ali Abu Atela, who was inside the cafe when it was bombed, told the Associated Press that, quote, without a warning, all of a sudden, a warplane hit the place, shaking it like an earthquake. Ismail Abu Hattab, a photojournalist who worked with various media outlets and who organized photo exhibitions outside Palestine, was killed in the bombing. The Gaza government media office said that Abu Hattab is the 228th reporter and media worker to be killed by Israel since October 2023. Also on June 30th, the Israeli army bombed the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Deir Balah for the 12th time in 21 months. The government media office said that Israel targeted a tent for displaced persons inside the hospital compound, resulting in injuries and material damage to the medical facility. Al Jazeera's Tarek Abu Azoum reported from the site.
Israeli military has just targeted Al-Aqsa, the courtyard of Al-Aqsa Hospital at the moment. This has been a huge explosion and there are people inside. The Israeli military till now did not warn this area before it was struck, and the hospital is in a state of emergency. As we can right now see, this is a makeshift tent that was struck, and rescue operations are just trying to take place at the moment by several defense members.
That was Tarek Abu Azoum reporting on June 30th at the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in central Gaza. Meanwhile, Israeli and American forces continue to use the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation aid distribution sites as killing fields. Since the private U.S.-led mercenary company began operations just over a month ago, at least 652 Palestinians have been killed, more than 4,500 Palestinians have been injured, and dozens remain missing while trying to obtain meager amounts of food. Euromed Human Rights Monitor stated this week that, quote, through the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, Israel has introduced a new killing mechanism cloaked in a humanitarian facade, further escalating the genocide in the Gaza Strip. The Israeli army's targeting of starving people near distribution centers has become a systematic daily practice, carried out openly before the world, with international silence perpetuating impunity and allowing this dangerous pattern to continue unpunished, the rights group added. This occurs as the international community, states and institutions, remains unable to take serious action to hold Israel accountable for its crimes, compel it to permit independent relief organizations to resume their work in the Gaza Strip, and lead humanitarian efforts that ensure the population's vital needs are met while safeguarding their lives and dignity. Doctors Without Borders said that the U.S.-Israeli scheme, quote, is slaughter, masquerading as humanitarian aid, and must be immediately dismantled. An emergency coordinator for Doctors Without Borders in Gaza said, quote, the 4 distribution sites, all located in areas under the full control of Israeli forces after people had been forcibly displaced from there, are the size of football fields surrounded by watch points, mounds of earth, and barbed wire. The fenced entrance gives only one access point in or out. GHF workers dropped the pallets and the boxes of food and opened the fences, allowing thousands in all at once to fight down to the last grain of rice. If people arrive early and approach the checkpoints, they get shot. If they arrive on time but there is an overflow and they jump over the mounds and the wires, they get shot. If they arrive late or they shouldn't be in there because it's an, quote, evacuated zone, they get shot, the worker added. On July 1st, more than 160 non-governmental organizations operating in Gaza issued an urgent call for immediate action to end the slaughter at the military-controlled food distribution sites. Quote, concentrating more than 2 million people into further confined areas for a chance to feed their families is not a plan to save lives, the joint statement said. These areas have become sites of repeated massacres in blatant disregard for international humanitarian law. Orphan children and caregivers are among the dead, with children harmed in over half of the attacks on civilians at these sites. With Gaza's healthcare system in ruins, many of those shot are left to bleed out alone, beyond the reach of ambulances and denied life-saving medical care. The groups demanded that third-party states not fund these militarized schemes, but instead support the restoration of, quote, a unified UN-led coordination mechanism grounded in international humanitarian law and inclusive of UNRWA, Palestinian civil society, and the wider humanitarian community to meet people's needs. This past week, the U.S. State Department approved $30 million in funding for the shadowy U.S.-based Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, with Reuters reporting that the U.S. could approve the same amount every month for an indefinite period. Sources speaking anonymously to Reuters said that the State Department, quote, exempted the foundation, which has not publicly disclosed its finances, from an audit usually required for groups receiving USAID grants for the first time. The foundation, which is reportedly based in Delaware but has no clear paper trail behind it, attempted to register an affiliate in Geneva, but it came under legal scrutiny by the Swiss government over its failure to fulfill legal requirements to operate in Switzerland, Reuters reported, including having the correct number of board members, a postal address, or a Swiss bank account, none of which were provided. Swiss media reported on Wednesday that the Swiss Federal Supervisory Authority for Foundations ordered the formal dissolution of the Geneva affiliate of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Part of the plan had to go through Switzerland to try to attract funding under the banner of neutrality and international Geneva, a central hub of international diplomatic missions, reported the Swiss broadcaster RTS earlier this week. According to information from the RTS investigation unit, a network of business agents helped find a Swiss representative, in this case, a lawyer with a presence in Geneva. International business partners with whom he regularly dealt convinced him to provide the foundation with an address and a representative in Switzerland as required by law. Journalists approached the Geneva lawyer to respond to information that was beginning to leak from the United States and Israel about the reality of the foundation's plan, which was more military than humanitarian, RTS reported. The lawyer resigned the same day that an article in the Swiss newspaper 𝐓𝐡𝐞 was published. The lawyer said that he resigned after realizing that international business partners had approached him without providing him with full information about the reality of the plan surrounding the foundation. That administrator was never active with the foundation and no bank account had ever been opened, RTS added. While people are killed every day at these so-called aid sites, and as thousands of tons of food, medicine, fuel, and supplies remain trapped on the other side of Israeli checkpoints just kilometers away, Palestinian children are dying of starvation. The Gaza government media office stated on June 28th that at least 66 children have been killed as a result of malnutrition and Israel's policy of deliberately depriving children of baby formula, nutritional supplements, and food. As the Electronic Intifada's senior editor, Maureen Claire Murphy, recently reported in her article, No Truce on Horizon as Gaza's Children Starve, the Palestinian Center for Human Rights warned that hundreds of infants and premature babies face life-threatening danger amid a shortage of therapeutic milk. Fortified milk is essential for infants with certain health conditions, but supplies have run out at Gaza's neonatal intensive care units and have all but disappeared in local markets due to Israel's severe restrictions on what enters Gaza's crossings, Murphy wrote. Dr. Jamil Suleiman, the director of Al-Rantisi Hospital in Gaza City, told the Associated Press that fortified formula required for newborns is out of stock and that many mothers, quote, are unable to breastfeed due to severe malnutrition. An American doctor told the French publication Le Monde Diplomatique that in preparation for his recent travel to Gaza on a medical mission, he had packed his suitcases full of basic medical supplies such as gauze, bandages, and sanitary pads, and several cans of baby formula. Once he arrived at the Allenby Bridge crossing, Israeli officers searched his bags and confiscated the baby formula. The coordinator of the medical convoy, Diana Nazal, told Le Monde, quote, the baby formula was confiscated. What other explanation is there if it's not that hunger is being used as a weapon of war in the ongoing genocide in Gaza? Physicians and women's healthcare workers have warned of the accelerating crisis for breastfeeding women and their newborns on previous episodes of the Electronic Intifada live stream and podcast. The ongoing ban of fuel into Gaza will imminently shut down essential facilities, the UN warned on June 30th, and will impact hospitals, water and sanitation equipment, telecommunications, the movement of cargo from crossings, and the operation of community kitchens. Already, the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza reported that Al-Shifa Medical Complex has suspended its kidney dialysis services due to fuel shortages, and that intensive care services will be limited to a few hours each day, the UN added. Al Jazeera reporter Hani Mahmoud stated on Tuesday that Al-Shifa Hospital, quote, was once the largest healthcare facility in Gaza, but has slowly turned into a waiting room for death, not just because of the war wounds, but because of a lack of fuel that keeps everything running. This showed that survival in Gaza is not just about escaping the airstrikes, but also about keeping the power on so patients can survive, he said. On January 25th, the World Health Organization said it was able to deliver its first medical shipment into Gaza since March 2nd, a small convoy of 9 trucks carrying essential medical supplies, 2,000 units of blood, and 1,500 units of plasma. The blood and plasma were delivered to Nasser Medical Complex's cold storage facility for onward distribution to hospitals facing critical shortages, amid a growing influx of injuries, many linked to incidents at food distribution sites, said the WHO spokesperson. However, Dr. Izzeddin Shahab, a physician and writer in Gaza, announced that this week that saline has run out at the Al-Ahli Hospital in Gaza City. He writes, quote, there is no medicine left here, not for the body, not for the soul. I have long spoken of the disintegration of Gaza's hospitals, how we labor beneath roofs that leak shrapnel, beside beds where children lie half alive. The World Health Organization calls it a collapse. Collapse is too gentle a word. This is annihilation. Today at Ahli Al-Arabi Hospital, we lost the last of our saline. Yes, saline, salt and water, the most elemental tool of medicine. Without it, we cannot hydrate the sick, cleanse a wound, keep a child alive through the night. Without it, our hands are not healing hands. They are hands that bury the living. This morning, a boy was carried in, limp and burning with fever. His father had wrapped his leg in a torn t-shirt soaked with old blood. We had no IV solution, no sterile wash. We used boiled water and a prayer. I looked at the boy's eyes. He did not cry. He had passed beyond crying. In another room, a mother whispered that she feeds her infant boiled lentil water, not out of neglect, out of poverty, out of starvation. Formula now costs more than the monthly aid they no longer receive. She cradled her child with the tender silence of someone who has already rehearsed the funeral. You want numbers? I will not give them. Numbers dehumanize. They make the dead easier to digest. Instead, I give you this: the sound of a child gasping through dust, the look in a nurse's eyes as she realizes she has nothing left to offer, the quiet, unbearable dignity of a people condemned to die tidily, without spectacle. Those are the words of Dr. Izzeddin Shihab, writing from Gaza City. One of Gaza's leading doctors was killed along with his family in an Israeli airstrike on their tent shelter in Gaza City on Wednesday. Dr. Marwan al-Sultan was a cardiologist and the director of the Indonesian hospital in northern Gaza, and was the 70th healthcare worker to be killed in the last 50 days, according to Healthcare Workers Watch, speaking to The Guardian. Dr. Mohammed Abu Salmiya, the director of Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City and a longtime colleague of Dr. Sultan, said that, quote, he was a prominent scholar and one of the 2 remaining cardiologists left in Gaza. Thousands of heart patients will suffer as a result of his killing. His only fault was that he was a doctor. We have no option but to be steadfast, but the sense of loss is devastating. International human rights organizations have renewed their calls to release Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya, the director of Kamal Adwan Hospital, who was abducted by Israeli soldiers at the end of December 2024 and remains in Israeli detention. Dr. Jon Elmer, the co-founder of the Chicago-based medical organization Med Global, spoke to NBC News on June 26th and said that he was, quote, very afraid that Abu Safiya won't make it out alive from Israeli jail. Abu Safiya was Med Global's lead physician in Gaza. The organization said that 5 other members of its medical staff are among the approximately 180 civilian health workers from Gaza still held without charge in Israeli prisons. In a new joint statement, 23 civil society organizations, including GLIA, Human Rights Watch, Doctors Without Borders, Physicians for Human Rights, and Médecins du Monde International Network, are calling for the immediate release of the imprisoned health workers. On June 29th, Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya was awarded the 2025 Human Rights Award by the Palestine-based Lawyers for Justice organization, which said, quote, this award aims to shed light on the sacrifices made by human rights defenders, particularly in the face of the ongoing genocide against civilians in Gaza and the suppression of freedoms. It also seeks to highlight the suffering of political prisoners and those who defend dignity under fire and bombardment. We've published many features on the Electronic Intifada in the last week, but we wanted to highlight how a new vocabulary is emerging in the genocide by Yusuf Al-Nono, writing from Gaza. Yusuf talks about many new words, quote, that are making their way into our vocabularies, words that we must now use to match the many unbelievable situations we find ourselves in. We are living in a surreal reality with new Ghazawi vocabulary to match, he writes. Gaza was not a quiet place before the war, but people got used to the annoying sounds of al-Zanana, or drones. But I don't think we will get used to the sky-splitting roar and high-pitched screeches of the fighter planes that fly overhead. In December 2024, my friend Mahmoud and I were chopping wood for a fire. I had not known Mahmoud for a long time. He was displaced from the nearby Al-Karama area. He was forced to stay at his aunt's house in our neighborhood because his house had been destroyed by an Israeli attack. After a short time, I got to know him a little better, and we became friends. Nearby, a group of children were playing as we chopped wood, and then we all heard the abrupt and terrifying shrieking sound of the jet. We covered our heads and got low to the ground, anticipating a missile strike. The children were terrified, and their little bodies shook with fear. They also thought it was a missile coming for us and started screaming. I tried to calm the kids down. I told them it was not a missile, that it was an F-16 that had come very close to the ground in order to confuse people and spread fear. Mahmoud said to the children, "Don't be afraid. The plane shahatat." Before that day, I had only heard the verb shahat in the context of a car screeching to a halt, like when a car travels at a high speed and suddenly slows down. The loud noise that follows, that is from shahat. Now I understand the word in a different way. Every time I hear the sound of a plane ripping across the sky, I say shahatat, shahatat to calm myself. Those are excerpts from Yusuf El-Nono's feature, How a New Vocabulary is Emerging in the Genocide, on electronicintifada.net. And finally, as we always do, we wanted to highlight people expressing joy, determination, and resilience across Palestine and around the world. Photojournalist Helena Cobban took these photos of a group of boys in Gaza. She says, quote, "In a courtyard shattered by war and stripped of all signs of life, I found children sweeping the rubble with their tiny hands, trying to bring back a place that was once a playground. They ran barefoot after a faded ball, as if chasing days that haven't arrived yet. I walked closer and asked one of them, 'Aren't you scared of the drones?' He looked up, breathless, and said, 'When did we ever stop playing?' I smiled, not because the place was safe, but because their souls still believed that playing here in Gaza is the purest form of survival." And that's from the photojournalist Helena Cobban. And that's it for the news roundup. As always, go to electronicintifada.net for much more, especially to read our new features by our brave writers in Gaza. You're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleague Ali Abunimah. Hi, Ali.
Hi, Nora. Thank you for that. There's been the 2 weeks we were not doing the regular program have been devastating, as devastating as any weeks in the past almost 2 years now. And it just leaves us speechless. But it's good to be back. It's good to see everyone back, everyone who's part of this community. Thank you for your patience while we were away. We missed you very much, and we had such lovely notes from many people saying that you missed us. And I hope you caught some of the coverage that we did do in the past few weeks, even without the regular live stream. We were very busy and very active, but it's nice to be back.
It is. Yeah, it's nice, and it's difficult. I mean, putting together the news report this week, it was, I mean, it feels like every week is worse than the last. And it just feels so overwhelming and so enraging. I mean, just, in doing my due diligence research about the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and the fact that the State Department has awarded it $30 million as American and Israeli snipers are shooting Palestinians trying to find a scrap of food for their families, as though it's like a fun video game or something. It's just it's all just so horrific, and it just seems endless. So we're going to keep watching that.
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to say, because I heard this from a lot of people over the last few weeks, which is that as we watch this and just the brazenness of what they're doing, I mean, it's beyond anything any of us could have imagined. I mean, I don't think I expected that this level of depravity in the open without shame.
Right.
And people feel just a sense of like, it's impossible to cope with the enormity of it. And I think I want to say the thing that helps me is I just keep doing what I do and what I can do. And that's what I want to say to people. Keep doing what you're doing. Don't be discouraged, because the consistent message that people in Gaza are giving us is don't stop talking about them. And whatever you do is important. So I just wanted to say that up front, because it's just become so incomprehensible
Yeah, I think that's exactly the word. Yeah, it's beyond all imagination of depravity and ruthlessness and savagery. Just the barbaric nature of these open, mass slaughters, masquerading as aid. I mean, I can't. I don't think we're meant to understand it because it is so inhuman and so against every moral fiber in our beings. But we have so much to get to. So why don't you introduce our guest, Ali?
Yeah, well, I'll just remind people that they're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream, and I'm Ali Abu Taha here with my colleague Nora Barrows-Friedman. On June 13th, Israel launched a surprise attack on Iran under the pretext of targeting its nuclear research facilities and its ballistic missile program. Israel and its sponsors in Washington all but openly admitted that their real goal was regime change in Tehran. Weakening Iran is seen from Tel Aviv and Washington as key to defeating the resistance to US hegemony in the region and ending specifically the resistance in Palestine. But Israel achieved none of its goals during the 12-day war, or did it? We'll talk about that. But despite early tactical successes, such as murdering Iranian commanders, scientists, and their families, Tel Aviv had to seek a cessation of hostilities as Iran's powerful response exhausted Israel's air defenses, shut down its ports and airport, paralyzed its economy, and devastated strategic sites. Far from weakening Iran's government, the Israeli attack rallied and united the Iranian population and strengthened its international standing. But few can be in doubt that even if Iran prevailed in this round, Israel and the US will not let the country live in peace. To discuss these developments and what might come next, we're joined now by Helena Cobban, a writer with decades of experience and knowledge about the region, and Helena directs Just World Educational. Welcome back to the Electronic Intifada live stream, Helena.
Oh, it's great to be with you. It's great that you're back on the air. I missed you guys for the last 3 weeks. Just before we get into the discussion that we're going to have, I want to say I really appreciated what you said about how we keep going amidst all this unfathomable, horrendous news. Some of us who are here in the United States as Palestine rights activists, spokespeople, advocates, I mean, it's particularly hard for us, I think, because it's our government that is directing and funding a lot of this. But there is good news. And I want to tell you that my 2 New York City-based grandkids don't even have the right to vote yet, but they were out there campaigning for Zahran Mamdani. And so, there is good news. We do make a difference, but it takes a long time. So just wanted to say that. Anyway.
It's good to see you, Helena.
West Asia, whatever.
Well, thank you so much for that, Helena. And yes, it's important to see the signs of rejection of the status quo, that people are taking every opportunity they can. And so that's another positive reinforcement. Well, let's look at let's start with what happened with the US-backed Israeli attack on Iran. We'll get into some of the detail, but just give us your sort of headline, big picture view. Do you think I gave a fair summary of Israel's goals and US goals, and what do you think the outcome was? Give us sort of your high-level overview.
Okay, just a snapshot. First of all, I think we need to describe this thing as a US-Israeli attack from the get-go. It was a joint effort. It was not US-backed Israeli attack. It was a US-Israeli attack that was coordinated from long ago, actually. The timing was not at all coincidental. They had been planning this for a very long time. Actually, before October 7th of 2023, they were already doing some of the planning for this. And if you recall back then, the Israeli military was like, damn, we have to do something about Gaza. Whereas we had all been focused on, first of all, knocking out Hezbollah and then the rest of the region-wide axis of resistance. And now we have to like get our hands dirty in Gaza. So we know that they have been planning this a long time, along with the head of the US CENTCOM. For some reason, the US military has a military command called CENTCOM that is located on a completely different continent than ours. But, you know, that's become kind of normalized, but it does. And their director, Air Force General Michael Kurilla, has been working hand in glove with the Israelis for a long time planning this. So I think that's very important to understand. I would look at this as having a number of different levels of what they were aiming to do. I think they wanted to dismantle Iran's command system. Now, you can call that regime change, but, you know, regime change actually also involves having a lot of local allies who raise, you know, color revolution type slogans. And they never really had that, honestly. You know, there are some ethnic minorities. There are some people like the MEK, which was until recently described as a terrorist group by our government. There's, you know, the son of the ancient Shah. There are little tiny people who want to, you know, portray themselves as potential successors in Tehran. But they just, I think what Kurilla and the Israelis wanted to do was dismantle the Iranian regime. And if that meant complete regime like collapse, complete social chaos, as we've seen in Libya, then so be it. I mean, I think that's a way of looking at the regime change. I think there was an opportunistic aspect to this. Obviously, Trump coming in gave the Israelis and Kurilla and his people a lot of hope that they would get more support for this than they did from the Biden people. And it's also, you know, what happened on October 7th of 2023 completely vaporized the Israelis' kind of aura of invincibility on which they base their so-called deterrence. It disappeared, you know? So they have to be able to reestablish the credibility of Israel's deterrent force, military force. How do they do that? You know, they thought that, you know, dismantling the government in Lebanon, you know, honestly, it was horrible for the Lebanese people, but that wasn't serious enough for the Israelis to be able to reestablish their deterrence. So it had to be Iran, and they had to do it when they could. So they had been planning this whole campaign through the IAEA, okay, the International Atomic Energy Agency, going back to like the early years of this century. They have had some niggly little doubts, or they create evidence like the kind of evidence that was created around chemical weapons during the civil war in Syria. And then they, you know, demand that the IAEA take, you know, forceful action. And meantime, they have actually infiltrated the IAEA in very important ways. We are now seeing the gray zone is it the gray zone? Oh, the Cradle has a really important new report on the degree to which Palantir and its tool called Mosaic have actually been used by the IAEA in order to feed, like, two ways, information from the Israelis to the IAEA, and then information from the IAEA inspections to the Israelis. So, the IAEA sends somebody to inspect a nuclear facility. And remember, Iran is allowed to have nuclear technology, nuclear production, nuclear enrichment up to a certain level. What it's prevented from doing under the NPT is weaponization. We can come to that later.
Yeah. So we'll talk more about the International Electronic Energy Agency, but that you kind of laid out the broad goals there. We know that towards the end of this 12-day war, President Trump ordered the US military to bomb these 3 Iranian nuclear sites, and then he swiftly declared victory. And there's been sort of this back and forth in the US media about was the strike successful? Was it not successful? How do you define that? Talk about how you see the political and military impact of that US strike. And let's get this question out of the way. How much is Iran's nuclear program just a distraction from real US and Israeli objectives? I mean, with Iraq, when we talk about, and this is true with Syria as well, but with Iraq, the whole pretext for the war was weapons of mass destruction, that Iraq supposedly had hidden stocks of chemical and biological weapons, and even they suggested nuclear weapons, which all of this was a lie. And we know that this was all besides the point. The real point was to topple the government in Iraq. Is that this? I mean, put that with that context, what are your thoughts about how much this is actually a concern with Iran, or is it just a pretext?
Good question. I think it is largely a pretext. And I also think that the corporate media here in the West has been majorly distracted by this whole question of, was Trump speaking the truth when he said that they've completely destroyed the Iranian nuclear program, or was he, obfuscating, or what about these other reports from the Defense Intelligence Agency? And that's all that they're talking about in the corporate media. Meantime, the basic fact that Israel suffered very bad damage during the war, damage it has never suffered before. I mean, we can see some of the reports of that coming out in Haaretz and other places now very belatedly. But the US corporate media has said nothing about this for a couple of reasons. One, the editors don't want to get into, Israel is actually very fragile and very ill protected and very vulnerable. And number two, all the reporters working in Israel are subject to military censorship. So, even there have been a couple of cases where a Fox News reporter, for example, was standing not far from the Israeli Defense Ministry when it got bombed by one of the Iranian missiles. And, he started to do the reporting on that, that this is the Israeli Defense Ministry. And security people immediately came and swept him off. I know, I've worked as a reporter in Israel, and especially in times of war, you are subject to very tight military censorship. They never tell us this, on the Western corporate media. They always say, we're prevented from going into Gaza because, so we can't actually, verify what all these Gaza health ministry people are telling us, so it's it's terrible. We're not allowed to go into Gaza, but they never tell you we are also subject to censorship from Israel. Really important for people to understand that. But the bottom line of what happened during the US-Israeli attack on Iran, which lasted for 12 days, you ended up with a mutually hurting stalemate. Both sides agreed to move back. The Iranians obviously had suffered quite a lot, including, many hospitals and research centers and completely non-military targets having been hit. And as Ali mentioned, obviously some of the key military commanders and nuclear scientists who were directly targeted at the beginning, and we can talk more about that later. But the Israelis also had suffered, as you said, huge economic and social losses that they had never experienced before. So I have to say that they have not succeeded either in toppling the Iranian regime, Iranian government, and they have not succeeded in reestablishing the credibility of Israel's military deterrence. So from that point of view, it has actually been a loss for the Israelis.
Helena, you had mentioned coverage in Haaretz, and I wanted to show this article, maybe the one that you're referring to. And the headline is, and Tamara, I dropped that in the chat. The headline is, chilling maps show Iran's missiles obliterated Israeli neighborhoods. And this article describes massive, massive damage, thousands of buildings, hundreds of buildings, thousands of individual units damaged, many buildings completely destroyed. But there's a couple of telltale things about this article. If you look at that subhead, it says, from Tamra to Tel Aviv and further south, Israeli engineers' maps show how a shock wave from Iran's ballistic missiles can be as ruinous as a direct hit. So they're largely talking about secondary blast damage and shock waves. But what's strangely missing from the article is any discussion at all of what the targeted sites were, what was actually directly hit or directly aimed at. There's no mention in this article of Israeli military or strategic sites that were hit, albeit that it describes unprecedented, as you put it, damage in many parts of Israel. What do you know about what the Iranians targeted?
I don't know a lot beyond that. That piece in Haaretz was like yesterday or maybe the day before, but very much later than, I mean, they held to the story a long time before they released it. That's worth noting. It wasn't like reported in real time. I've seen other reports that the Israeli Defense Ministry at the Kiryat was targeted. The Weizmann Institute of Science, which was a major military science center, and several of the other university departments that do military science have been targeted, which would be kind of analogous, you can say, to what the Israelis were targeting in Tehran when they killed, they did targeted killings of Iranian nuclear scientists and other scientists, as well as off-duty leading officers. Remember, on June 13th, the Iranians were still preparing for the June 15th session of the nuclear talks with Trump. So presumably many high military people were just sleeping at home. When somebody is not in active combat, you're not allowed to target them. We need to remember that. That's why they use the term non-combatants as opposed to civilians or military. The distinction in humanitarian law is between combatants, people who are in active combat, and non-combatants, which includes active military people who are on vacation or sleeping at home with their families. And we need to remember how they had targeted Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran earlier, and then how they have targeted so many individual scientists, leaders, writers, and of course our dear friend 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 in Gaza, and many individuals in Lebanon and the West Bank using electronic signals. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 was targeted through his cell phone. And I don't know exactly how they had targeted these Iranian scientists and military people. I do note, however, that Iran has just said they're not going to be using GPS anymore because that's a potential vulnerability. They're going to be using a Chinese navigational system called Beidou, which actually is called Beidou Systems and is sometimes referred to as BDS. So there you go.
Helena, let's talk about the ceasefire that was declared after the 12 days. What prompted the U.S. to seek that ceasefire, and do you think it'll hold? And in the meantime, what did we learn about both Israel's and Iran's military capabilities in this, in that 12-day war? And I think, of course, also, what did we learn about the U.S.'s willingness to expand a regional war? Or, basically, what are your thoughts on the ceasefire, and do you think it'll hold?
I think it might hold for longer than people think. I'm not going to make any direct predictions, but it was a ceasefire that was kind of by mutual agreement. It wasn't, painstakingly negotiated like the ceasefire that Trump claims he's negotiating, on Ukraine, or claims he's negotiating on Gaza. This was like both sides, all three sides. Well, on the one side, the US and Israel, and on the other side, Iran said, whew, let's just take a step back, or 3 steps back, or whatever. On the US-Israeli side, specifically the Israeli side, Israel has this multi-layered missile defense system, and only the lowest level of it is called the Iron Dome, and the Iron Dome defends against small rockets. I call them bottle rockets, but they're not, small rockets of the kind that the resistance in Gaza, by the way, continues to send against Israel, and that Hezbollah used to have a lot of. Then they have the Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 up higher and higher, and those are very expensive interceptor missiles that that the Israelis use, and that's kind of locked in with this US high altitude system called the THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Air Defense. The THAAD is a completely 100% US system, and they deployed it to Israel. I can't remember exactly when, but it was definitely used in absolute, lockstep integration with the Arrow systems during the 12-day war. That's why I call it the US-Israeli war on Iran, because it was a joint operation. So they were running out of interceptor missiles. I mean,
I can speak to this from firsthand experience. I just came back from Jordan, and I watched the entire 12-day war. I live tweeted a lot of the missile attacks because we could literally see everything in the sky above us in Jordan. And it was notable at the beginning of the war, the first couple of days, that the air raid sirens would go off in Jordan, and so I'd go up to the roof, and you would see interceptors going up from the west, in other words, from the direction of Israel, before you would see Iranian missiles arriving. And towards the end of the war, there were very few interceptors going up. Now, that might be a combination of the fact that the Iranians were clearly using different kinds of missiles towards the end, which were coming in much faster and at a much steeper angle. But even when I saw the ballistic missiles that sort of came on a more kind of, let's say, relaxed pace, there were not as many interceptors going up. That was just very clear.
Yeah, I thank you for the tweeting, Ali. I mean, you and a few other people from Jordan were giving us this kind of front row view of what was happening. Must have been weird for you to be looking at that and to know that essentially the Jordanian government was 100% supporting the American-Israeli attack war there. Yeah, I think the Iranians have been planning for this kind of a war for a long time. I just read a really interesting article in The Cradle, and I wish I could send you the link, but I'm not supposed to do anything on my computer while I'm talking. But a great article in The Cradle, which is a kind of a review of Iran's ballistic missile programs, going back to the original US-backed Iraqi attack against the Iranian revolutionary regime that I covered as a journalist in September of 1980, when Saddam Hussein invaded Iraq with the help of Iran, with the help of some Iranian dissidents and a lot of help from Donald Rumsfeld and others. So, yeah, they have been developing their ballistic missile and drone and coordination capabilities ever since then. I mean, the amount of losses that they took in that war in the 1980s was stupendous. You know, whole generations of young Iranians went to the battlefield and were killed. So now they have like a very complicated set of different attack and defense capabilities at various different altitudes. Oh, thank you, Ali. Ali just put it in the, yeah. So they held back some of the more advanced ones at the beginning, as Ali mentioned, and these are the hypersonic missiles that go really high. And then they also have the drones that kind of creep along, not exactly hugging the ground, but also, you know, fairly low. So what you had was a situation where the US-Israeli war campaign was capable of maintaining a kind of an air bridge right across Jordan for those waves of Israeli bomber planes that would traverse the, 1,800 kilometers from Israel to Iran and then drop their bombs. One of the early missions, of course, had been to wipe out Iran's air defense capabilities. So they were capable of coming in at that level and bombing additional Iranian sites. But what they were not capable of doing was detecting and intercepting all the low-level ground huggers or the very high, very fast ballistic missiles. So that's why Iran suffered really badly, obviously, including, you know, many military sites in addition to these non-military sites and the hospitals and so on. But Israel also suffered. That's why I call it a mutually hurting stalemate. What have we learned about the capabilities? I think we've learned that Iran has a much more capable military and military command system than what the Israelis had been planning on. You know, they had thought that by assassinating in those early hours of June 13th, that they could completely cripple Iran's entire command and control system. But the Iranians have been used to this in the past. Like many of the other parts of the axis of resistance in West Asia, they have built in redundancy and redundancy and redundancy and resilience, so that even if the Israelis were able to wipe out the head and many other leaders of the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, still there were backup systems that were capable of organizing what turned out to be a very sophisticated response.
Thanks for that. You know, I was remembering back to the days of the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq. And, as Ali mentioned before, all of these, these propaganda campaigns very similarly popping up again. Iran has weapons of mass destruction and they have a rogue nuclear weapons program. Yes, exactly. And, it was interesting, I think, to many people to see that the U.S., was employing the same rhetoric and the same propaganda, but 12 days is a very short amount of time, in comparison to the years-long invasion and occupation and destruction of Iraq. What can you say about, I think, talk a little more about the U.S.'s kind of stance here and why, a 2003 invasion of Iraq style war against Iran was impossible for the U.S. to pull off.
So when George W. Bush invaded Iraq in 2003, as you've both noted, obviously they used much of the same sort of weapons of mass destruction, manufacturing consent through fear in that way. But they had also systematically strangled Iraq at that point through 13 years of very, very tight sanctions. So, there have been sanctions on Iran for just as long, maybe even longer. But we are now, so the invasion of Iraq happened in 2003. What on earth?
It's AI from your camera. Yeah, no, it's okay.
Oh, gosh. I'm sorry. I don't know if people saw that. That was horrible. But, okay. Now I'm very spooked, very spooked. So, okay. This time, the Iranians have learned to deal with the sanctions much more effectively than Saddam was ever able to do. Iran is a much bigger country than Iraq. It has a big hinterland, like it has relations with Russia, obviously, on its northern border, and with many other countries around its borders, including Pakistan, and Afghanistan is a little iffy. But long story short, the what I call team sanctioned, which is the kind of the unofficial team of all the countries against whom the United States has wielded sanctions, most of those sanctions being completely outside of the UN system. Unilateral coercive measures is what they are called in international parlance. So, they sanction this country and that country, and then they sanction Russia. When they added Russia to team sanctioned, they strengthened team sanctioned considerably.
And the irony is, when they sanction you like that, they force you to become self-sufficient or to develop those other relations. So, in Iran, a country that would, say, be dependent on US military technology and on contracts to service its warplanes, by Grumman or Boeing or whoever, is a country that can never go to war against the United States or never defend itself against the United States. Whereas a country that has been sanctioned and has to develop its own indigenous technology or get them from other countries that are sanctioned is the US inadvertently helping these countries?
Yes, I think that's been the effect of this rush to sanctions that we've seen for the last, since Clinton, honestly. Another little point about the relationship with other countries. in that article that we had up a little while ago about Iran's development of its ballistic missile programs, they did note that they got a lot of technology from North Korea back in the day. And another important piece of this story, of the June 13th attack story, is that just at the end of May of this year, the first train arrived in Tehran, having traversed the brand new and very highly invested China-Iran railroad system. I mean, you know, I don't know how many trains have come and gone along this. It takes, I think, about 12 days for a train to go up through a lot of the stands and you know, across the whole of China, and to end up, you know, from Beijing or from Xi'an, which is a wonderful city in eastern China, all the way across to Tehran. This is new. You know, I've actually just been reading a little bit about the British Empire in Africa, and how in the 19th century, the British were desperate to, you know, connect Cairo to Cape Town. So they wanted a railroad, you know, and the French, a north-south railroad. And the French were meantime trying to build an east-west railroad. And that was the big, you know, like how you undergird your empire. So the Iranians now have a direct rail link to China. And I think that's also maybe part of the timing for the US-Israeli attack, that they wanted to really be able to dismantle the Iranian regime before this whole relationship with China becomes a really big thing. And of course, it has completely backfired, like all those sanctions that you mentioned. Because
let's talk about that, Helena. We're going to talk about how this impacts Gaza, but since you started to talk about China, let's keep that train of thought going. You'd mentioned earlier Iran's strategic location. Of course, it's central to this China's Belt and Road Initiative, and the railroad is part of that. But also, Iran is a very close neighbor to Russia. They both share the Caspian Sea, and Iran and Russia have strategic relationships where Iran can provide Russia with access to warm water ports for trading and other purposes potentially. So talk about how, in a recent blog post, you wrote about the very significant contribution that China has made behind the scenes to strengthening Iran's resilience, as well as its defensive and offensive military capabilities. Those are your words. How do you think this conflict is being viewed by China? And let's also talk about Russia. How have they reacted? How do you think they will be adjusting their policies in the wake of this US-Israeli joint attack on Iran?
So if we go back to that session of the IAEA Board of Governors that was held on June 12th, I can't remember if I've mentioned this yet, but this was a crucial part of the preparation for the attack that we know was launched overnight between the June 12th and June 13th. In other words, while the Board of Governors of the IAEA was voting on this very dodgy resolution that, you know, chastised Iran and said that they're not in compliance with their obligations. So that was passed on June 12th, even while the Board of Governors of the IAEA was deliberating on that resolution. The Israelis and Americans were already starting to load their bombs for the attack that took place overnight. We know that. I mean, obviously they were doing that. So in that deliberation at the Board of Governors of the IAEA, China, Iran, it's China, Russia, and I've got the map somewhere, I should have sent it, but just a small number of countries voted against the resolution of censure of Iran, and the US and all the major European members of the Board of Governors and Australia. So it was really a kind of white world versus, the resisting governments of the world, and they got their resolution through. So, it's clear that, and the Russian and Chinese ambassadors to the IAEA made very significant statements there. And then 16 days later, was it? When was it we had the UN Security Council discussion? Oh, no, this UN Security Council discussion was the 22nd of June. So exactly 10 days later. And that was right after the US direct participation in the bombing that happened on the night of 21st, 22nd. So it's really interesting. I was very interested to see the statements that the Chinese and Russian and other people had made in that Security Council meeting that was an emergency meeting called by the president of the Security Council. Now, it's kind of interesting, and obviously both of them expressed complete opposition and censure of the US bombing and of the Israeli completely unprovoked attack. I mean, we need to underscore again and again, like how unprovoked all these attacks on Iran were. But interestingly, one of the other people who spoke at that Security Council session on June 22nd was the representative of Kuwait, who was speaking as a representative of all the GCC countries, which are the 6 Arabian Peninsula countries. They don't include Yemen. So it's basically all those little emirates down the Arabian coast of the Gulf, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, and Kuwait up at the top of the Gulf, and Oman and Saudi Arabia. That's the Gulf Cooperation Council. They also expressed strong opposition to the US-Israeli bombing of Iran. That is very significant. In an earlier era, let's say if this had happened 5-10 years ago, Washington would have confidently expected that the GCC countries would line up behind any attempt to overthrow or undermine the government in Tehran. But in the meantime, one of the key things that has happened is that in March of 2023, the Chinese foreign minister unveiled a new agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran that was a reconciliation after so many decades of really, very strong hostilities between the two. So what we're talking about is a kind of a slow advance of Chinese influence in West Asia, in parts of West, including in parts of West Asia that the US white empire had been confident of holding just a few years ago. Don't know if that answered your questions, but I mean, we're definitely seeing global change. It's far
do you think that there would be a I mean, there has been talk of Iran, or Russia had offered Iran even a sort of a strategic defense relationship, and the Iranians were somewhat reluctant to take that up because Iran has fought very hard for its sovereignty and independence, and they talk about the Iran-Iraq war, which, as you mentioned, Iraq at that time was aligned with the West, and that the Iraqi invasion of Iran in 1980 was backed by the West, but Iran also points out that it was effectively supported by the Soviet Union. So Iran has a history of being perhaps understandably wary of being too close to another country. But given that Iran fought alone for 12 days and did very well in terms of its military performance and its ability to exhaust Israel and the US. Do you think they would be seeking closer military ties with either China or Russia? And do you think that those countries would be willing to? I mean, are we just talking about sort of big economic and geopolitical changes over time, or are they going to really get more involved, having, from their perspective, lost Syria, and then seeing this attack on Iran and knowing that it's likely to happen again in some form? Are the alarm bells ringing in Moscow and Beijing, or are they just going to be giving statements to the Security Council?
Alarm bells. I don't think either of them, gets into a tizzy when things like this happen. I think they are capable of, certainly. I actually these days I'm following Chinese foreign policy much more than Russian, because I've been intrigued since March of 2023 with the quiet but very effective expansion of Chinese influence. It is not just economic and soft power. They have provided Iran with the form of guidance systems that that enabled the missiles to be so accurate in hitting the Israeli targets. And now they're going to be providing, much broader sets of electronic services, let's say, to Iran, as a way to help Iranians not be subject to the kind of spooking and backdoor security cooperation that exists with WhatsApp or with any of these things that assure you that you have end-to-end encrypted communication. So long as they are run by US corporations, that they can be spooked. And we saw that the Washington Post, the Washington Post ran this really bizarre story that had been fed to them by an Israeli, presumably Mossad person, that contained a little audio recording of him or somebody in the Mossad making this call to a senior Iranian general, telling him, what happened to General so-and-so and so-and-so. If you want yourself and your wife and your family to be safe, you have to leave. And giving him, I think, a WhatsApp connection. This is how you contact us. So this Israeli Mossad guy was clearly very proud of, we were even able to contact senior Iranian generals. We know they were, because they managed to spook them and kill them in the same way that they had Ismail Haniyeh several months ago. So all that kind of vulnerability to Western backdoors into Western systems, as we've seen also with the International Criminal Court, where Microsoft was subject to US government just a diktat that Microsoft can no longer provide communications to the ICC. And so the ICC was absolutely blinded and deafened for, quite a few days until they could get backup communication systems running. So I think actors around the world understand that anytime you are using US tech, including all the tech that you're using here on Electronic Intifada, you can easily be spooked. So the Chinese in particular offer a very robust alternative to that. And I think countries, political actors all around the world are very interested, have been looking at the degree to which the US government is capable of getting into your communications. So yeah, I mean, things are changing very speedily. I just want to note, though, since I'm here in Washington, D.C., guess who we're about to receive here on Monday? Netanyahu is coming to town. So, you know, the world is changing, as I said, but not nearly fast enough. And we've got this going on, and we've got, you know, the latest, well, all the many ways in which our government continues to support Israel's genocide.
Yeah. Well, I want to segue to what's happening in Gaza, and how, you know, how the 12 days of war between the US, Israel, and Iran impacted what was happening in Palestine. I mean, during those 12 days, I think it was 900 Palestinians were slaughtered. There, you know, were people in Gaza, you know, hoping that Iran's attacks on Israel would, you know, make a dent strategically in the massacres in Gaza, but you know, it kind of got pushed to the side, at least in the media, and it, you know, for all intents and purposes, Israel accelerated their attacks, and I can't remember where it was. I think it was in the Israeli media yesterday. There was a you know, revelation that Israeli pilots who were called back after the ceasefire on Iran needed to dump their extra, you know, loaded munitions from the planes, and they just, you know, flew sorties over Gaza and dumped, you know, a bunch of missiles on people. Just like horrific massacres that keep happening. What do you see as the potential effect for Palestinians, particularly for Gaza, in terms of the fallout from that 12-day war? And do you think, you know, the way that this round ended brings us any closer for a real lasting ceasefire in Gaza, one that also incorporates, of course, an end to the siege, release of prisoners, and you know, lets aid in from international actors?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned what I thought of as like a drive-by shooting by the Israeli pilots. I mean, just outrageous. Hey, we got these bombs, might as well use them. I mean, who on earth would think, well, you know, yeah.
Zionists, yeah.
Yeah. I think there is right now, given the performance the Iranians displayed, the resilience, their ability to continue delivering harm and hurt to Israel till the very last day, that this does affect the regional balance of power, including the balance of, you know, power around the Gaza issue and the Gaza ceasefire issue. There's another way in which I think it's relevant. You know, ever since October of 2023, the Israeli government has essentially been running a series of protection rackets, all focused on allowing Netanyahu to continue his genocide in Gaza. And initially it was like, I mean, the target for these protection rackets is the US government and US public opinion, but mainly the government. So they were saying initially, oh, you know, don't press us too hard on Gaza, else we might have to accelerate in the north, that is against Lebanon. So then they did both. You know, they continued to the genocide in Gaza and they hit Lebanon. And then it was like, oh, don't press us too hard on Gaza, the West Bank and Lebanon, because we might have to hit, if you did that, we might have to hit Iran. So, you know, for several months, they have not pressed Israel at all hard. And I'm talking about both Biden and Trump. And so finally they did, you know, what they had threatened to do. They attacked Iran, and it proved to be a damp squib, honestly, from their perspective. So what else are they going to threaten to do now? You know, are they going to threaten to use their nuclear weapons, which they have? I mean, they have nuclear weapons. They haven't used them. But, you know, what kind of outrageous threat can they make now in order to support their protection racket? I don't think they can. I think, you know, right now, even Trump seems to be saying that he wants to see a Gaza ceasefire. Now, what the terms of that ceasefire are, and I would say an essential term for the ceasefire has to be that it's the end of the Israeli occupation of Gaza. You know, under whatever non-Israeli kind of an administration there, if we could have, you know, a sensible and not US dominated UN administration there, that would be much, much better than Israel continuing to run this occupation and to hold Gaza as it has for 58 years now, as a captive society, a captive economy, and you know, potentially we could, if there's a ceasefire now and the genocide ends and we don't have the end of the occupation, then we could have another genocide next year. We could have another genocide the year after. So, you know, the occupation has to end. And I think maybe the the balance of power in West Asia has been shifted a little bit. Is somebody talking? Okay.
No, go ahead.
The balance of power has been shifted a little bit in West Asia. It's notable that the GCC powers have been like not aligning with the US and Israel, and they remain in support of, I know Ali won't like this, they remain in support of the two-state solution. You know, they are not, I don't think the Saudis are about to normalize with Israel unless there is very palpable diplomatic progress on the Israel-Palestine issue. And that's kind of new as well, honestly. You know, I wouldn't have said that 6 years ago.
Well, I mean, part of it is, I won't get into the two-state issue because I think it's so far from, you know, any type of reality. But, you know, I wrote about this. I mean, the whole basis of normalization between Israel and these various Arab regimes was the premise that Iran is the real enemy, and Israel, being this powerful state aligned with the US, is the protector. So we, Israel, can protect you vulnerable Arab regimes from the big Iranian bogeyman. But just, you know, even if you look at this entirely cynically, that doesn't, that's not a very attractive deal, because Israel, its big threat was always, we are so powerful and, you know, hold us back or we're going to attack Iran. Well, they did it and they got beaten up. I mean, yes, certainly Iran suffered damage, and it has to be mentioned because this wasn't covered really anywhere in the Western media. More than 600 Iranian civilians were killed in this attack and thousands injured. But my point is that you know, Israel, it's all talk in a way. I mean, yeah, you know, I'm saying not to minimize the harm they did. They did real harm to Iran and Iranians, but they're not this Superman. And so what's the benefit to even normalizing with them? What do you get for it? Some promises from the US that you don't know if they'll survive from 1 hour to the next, if Trump will change his mind or the next administration will change its mind. What benefit is there even to joining up to that sort of axis of genocide?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think we're on the same page, Ali. Like I said, it was a damp squib.
Well, I think there's so much more we can talk about, Helena, and your writing and your observations are so rich. We maybe just a very quick final word from you about the call to humanity that you published, and then maybe just tell people where they can find out more of your work, we can see that Just World Educational, which is the organization that you run, and that's the website. But just say a bit more about what this call to humanity is.
Yeah, so our board, which has some wonderful people on it, including Nora, so thanks, Nora, and we just actually were working on this, I want to say on June 12th, maybe June 11th, June 12th. We thought that, we have to find a way to galvanize the world community, or to work with people and governments around the world to overcome the US veto at the United Nations, especially on the issue of genocide. And then, of course, we had the Israeli-US June 13th attack on Iran. So we added Iran into our list of things, end to the US-Israeli genocide in Gaza, end to the US-Israeli attack on Iran, and an end to the US veto in the United Nations, which is the key, I think, to ending the genocide. Of course, the US-Israeli attack on Iran ended much more speedily than the genocide, for God's sake. 12 days, and the Iranians proved that they could resist and persist, which is amazing. And Ali is quite right to note that they suffered a lot for the cause. But anyway, our demand for an end to the US veto in the United Nations definitely needs to continue, definitely needs to be focused on ending the genocide in Gaza. I'm not sure how we're going to take it forward. We got quite a lot of support for the original, like, 3-demand version of the call to humanity. And I think we need to circle back with some of our colleagues from other organizations like Code Pink or World Beyond War, and a number of community organizations, and see how to refine the call for ending the US veto at the United Nations. My little touchstone on this is just what happened in 1956, when the British and French worked with Israel in a really horrible campaign to overthrow Egypt's President Nasser by invading the Suez Canal and so on. So at that point, obviously, Britain and France, as today, had veto power in the United Nations. And President Eisenhower, for his own reasons, was opposed to this, and he wanted to overcome the British and French veto. And he did so using this mechanism in the UN General Assembly called Uniting for Peace, and he backed it up with very concrete economic threats against all 3 members of the tripartite aggression. He threatened to pull the plug on the pound sterling and to do something very similar to the French franc. And I think he definitely used economic power against the Israelis. So if the US veto in the United Nations is going to be overcome, I think it needs a lot of both political and economic action and diplomatic action through the Uniting for Peace at the General Assembly. So stay tuned, to learn more about what we're going to be doing on this. I think the fact that there is the US veto and that it's been used so many times and so outrageously, both under Biden and under Trump, to support and protect the genocide is something that future generations are never going to forgive these governments for.
Well, it's important to be reminded, Helena, that people and organizations can do more than just sit and watch this sort of international geopolitical theater, but you can actually, and you are pressing for a reform and change, and that's really valuable. So thank you. Helena, we could stay with you for another hour easily. And there's so much more to cover, but we'll have you back soon. And thank you for all the very rich insights. And just a reminder that you are the director of Just World Educational. You're the author of several important historical books. You're the publisher of Just World Books that has done such incredible publishing on Palestine and on Gaza over the past few years. And you are a journalist with many, many decades of knowledge and experience, and we're so grateful to you for sharing it with us. So we'll have you back again soon. We always learn from listening to you.
No, I'm really delighted to be with all of you, and I'm just eager to hear what Jon Elmer has to say. So bring it on.
Aren't we all?
Absolutely. And a lot of people are, because there's nothing like his analysis. And so he's going to catch us up on almost 2 weeks of really significant developments on the ground.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Helena. Always a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you, Helena. See you soon.
Always so she's so clear and such important analysis. So yeah, I'm really glad we pulled her back on.
And there's so many angles to this, and I feel like we tried to hit many of them, and there's still so much we didn't talk about. So we're definitely going to keep talking about all of these things.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, things are moving so quickly. I mean, next week might look completely different from this week. We don't know yet. So, but it's so important to have, the kind of grounding analysis that Helena is so well known for. So always appreciate her. Well, let's bring on Jon. Hey, Jon. Oh, you're muted. Jon did a special. I'm pretty sure a lot of people watched it just a few days after we went on our planned break. Jon did a special edition of the Resistance Report focusing on Gaza and the attacks by Iran on Israel. Jon, is your mic? Oh, no. Still can't hear you.
Well, we had a little audio issue earlier, and it was fixed, so we're going to try and fix that now. Yeah, that special report by Jon was really good. People can find it on the YouTube channel. And we also I did an interview with Dr. Mohammed Marandi the day the war started. So we did do some coverage. We were present during that time. Jon, are you there now?
Oh, no.
Oh.
Still muted. Maybe switch to your computer audio after all.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the last 3 weeks since our break, there have been several kind of high level, resistance campaigns in Gaza by Palestinian armed groups, and Yemen, I know, also set off a bunch of Israeli alarms yesterday and the day before. There's so much to talk about. Hopefully Jon will be able to do it. I can do it. I'll do it. Yeah.
Maybe I'll give the resistance report.
Yeah, do it.
Week. How would people like that?
Still can't hear you, Jon.
Okay, Jon, do you want to try your computer audio and see if that will work?
This is all just building the tension.
Yeah, it's building the tension.
Nope. Now I'm the only one with audio. Yeah,
I'm still here, but I was going to suggest, Jon, if you want to restart your computer and see if you can pull up the computer audio. No, and then Nora and I will keep the show going in the meantime.
Yeah,
and everyone will be waiting with bated breath. Don't worry about that.
So sad. Well, Ali, I mean, maybe, I'm really interested to hear more about what you witnessed while you were in Jordan in terms of the 12 days of war and kind of your impression of the kind of capabilities that Iran had, and you know the bruising that Israel took.
Yeah. I mean, it was extraordinary. By coincidence, I was in Jordan last October when Iran launched True Promise 2, and that set up the expectations for what we would see this time. And in True Promise 2, that operation was carried out in the course of a couple of hours, where Iran fired something like 200 ballistic missiles at Israel, and
Yeah.
I saw them, and it was like a river of missiles, like shooting stars going across the sky, and interceptors going up. So this time around, you know, we'd been led to believe, or I don't know whether formally or informally, but that if Israel attacked Iran again, that they would launch 1,000 missiles at once, or some just massive, spectacular operation. And what I think surprised everyone is that Iran didn't do that. On the first night, they launched about 100 missiles, which was pretty impressive when you see them going across the sky. But they didn't launch them all at once. They went in batches of you know, a couple of dozen here, a few there. And that's what they did over the next 12 days. And the first night or two, there was sort of a pattern where the missiles went up at night when you could see them very clearly. But then they started to go at all times of day. And the air raid sirens in Jordan would sound early in the morning or in the afternoon. And you would see the Iranians, you could see all this with the naked eye. They would be using different tactics, in the sense that on some days, they would launch just a few missiles towards, whether it was in the direction of Haifa or Tel Aviv, and other times they would launch these pretty big volleys of, you know, 20 or 30 missiles. And it seems that they were deliberately being unpredictable. And as I mentioned earlier, you could see in the beginning the large number of interceptors going up. And some of them, I think, were the American, the THAAD missiles that sort of very high altitude, exo-atmospheric. When they burst, they sort of look like jellyfish in the sky. I mean, that's the best way I can describe them. Whereas when the lower altitude, I think the Israeli interceptors went up, you'd actually see a puff of white smoke when they exploded. And it was very clear to me that they were not hitting. I mean, there probably were some interceptions, but many times you would see the missile just go by the interceptors. And the interceptors are programmed to explode whether or not they hit something, so that the whole missile doesn't come down to earth. They self-destruct. So it was really incredible and remarkable. And the social aspect of this was really important. Just check in whether if we have an update from Jon.
He's restarting his computer.
Still, okay, all right. So I'll just keep talking. Just butt in when when we have Jon. The social aspect of this was that everyone was watching. You know, people wanted to see this, and the air raid sirens in Jordan were supposed to tell people to go and take cover, but I think mostly they were a signal for people to go out and look. And you would, especially in the evening, when people are out on their verandas or on their roofs or on their balconies anyway, to, you know, to have a bit of a break from the heat, you would hear people cheering or saying Allahu Akbar, or, you know, the sight of the missiles going to, and knowing that they were hitting, you could hear them hitting. I mean, you could hear the sort of the distant sort of lighter thuds from the interceptors. But there were sometimes these earth-shaking booms, and we're talking about a distance of 150 kilometers away. If you're in Amman in Jordan, you're talking about these missiles hitting the ground 150 kilometers away, and you're hearing this loud boom. And sometimes there was at least one occasion where I felt the ground vibrate, which just gives you a sense of the power of these Iranian warheads. It was really like nothing I'd seen before. And to be able to watch it in real time was just incredible.
And there was also, I mean, just the significance, and Helena mentioned this of Iran hitting major like scientific, military, intelligence, command and control centers like the Weizmann Institute, various air bases. I mean, what do you think the kind of intelligence impact was by hitting those strategic targets?
Well, it's important to say that officially we don't know what strategic targets were hit, that none of that's been admitted. But we were able to, I wrote an article about how the Iranians clearly hit, even though this wasn't reported as such in the Israeli and the foreign media because of the censorship, you could tell from the images and the videos that they clearly hit this major Israeli army cyber warfare base in Beersheba in the south. And it's this huge base that they've invested billions and billions in, and wasn't even completed. And what they've done is they have integrated this Israeli army military and cyber command base with all these tech firms that we've talked about before, like Microsoft and Intel and others. We talked about a few weeks ago with the Microsoft current and former workers, the role of Microsoft in that genocide through the services they provide to the Israeli military. Well, Microsoft actually has its offices in that military base in Beersheba. And we learned that because of the video coming out and the explosions near the Microsoft office. I don't think they actually hit the Microsoft building directly, but they hit other facilities near it that were part of this base. I also learned a lot by looking at Google Maps. You can tell. It's interesting because you have Google Street View, and you can actually, it's hard to describe this, but you can actually see all the streets in a country that are covered by Google Street View. But what's interesting is in Israel, the Google Street View is suppressed in strategic areas. So that's supposed to hide them, but it actually tells you where they are, because when you see this sort of hole in the Google Street View coverage, you can tell you're looking at a sensitive site. And there I could see some of the sites that appeared to have been hit, or at least from the videos and pictures that I was able to see, they clearly targeted the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 area, which is an area north of Tel Aviv where there's a lot of intelligence bases. And they hit the refinery in Haifa, which is significant because they knocked that out of action completely. I think it's still shut down. It may be shut down for months. The Haifa port, Israel only has three ports that are capable of handling large-scale container vessels. Eilat, which has been shut down now for some time, basically by Ansar Allah in Yemen, the Eilat port is not functioning. But then on the Mediterranean, you have Haifa and Ashdod, and both of those appear to have been targeted, and both were shut down. And even if they could have continued to officially receive ships, or technically to receive ships, what we saw is international shipping companies, including Maersk, and we've talked about the role Maersk played in bringing weapons to Israel. Maersk said, we're not going to sail into Haifa anymore. So look at that. Israel was, and of course, Ben Gurion Airport was shut down completely, and Ramon Airport in the south was shut down completely. So over these 12 days, Israel was completely cut off from the world by air, by sea, not quite by land, because lots of Israelis were trying to get out of the country and left through Egypt and Jordan. But for goods coming in, they were cut off. So this is why Israel could not sustain a war of attrition. Israel really depended on striking a knockout blow against Iran in the first day or two, where they thought that the shock and awe would cause the leadership to topple and the Iranian people to rise up. But the moment that did not happen, then Israel was stuck in a war of attrition where it could not fight, and it had to basically cry uncle, and that's what happened.
That's right. I think Jon is back. Let's try to get him on.
Am I back?
Oh,
you are back.
Yes.
You are back. How did I do? Did you hear me, Jon? Did
Yeah, it was fire.
Okay, thank you, because not trying to step into your shoes, but I'm the warm-up act, let's say.
No,
That's right.
I don't know what's going on here.
It was a tight five, Ali. That was great.
Thank you.
Ghosts in the computer.
All right. Well, Jon, there is so much that happened, and everyone is clamoring. So let's just get right into it.
Yeah, a lot of serious things happened, and
Yes.
so we're looking forward to your analysis.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump right into it. All right, you are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada. I am Jon Elmer. This is the Resistance Report for day 636 of Israel's genocidal war. We'll begin with the maps, as we always do, to ground us on this. We are going to be focusing today on the battle in Khan Yunis. This is the second battle in Khan Yunis. The first battle of Khan Yunis went from December 2023 until the end of Ramadan, early April 2024. And this is the first time, beginning in late May, but particularly in the first few weeks of June, that the Israeli military has operated in Khan Yunis. We're showing you this map right now on the screen that I've been using for the last few months because it shows the free fire zones that the Israeli military is operating under. And when you look at those maps, you can see that there's just 3 small places in Gaza that people are being pushed to. This is a pressure tactic. The Jerusalem Post had some Israeli military sources speaking to it the other day, and they said the plans are discussed to evacuate Gazawis from key areas. They noted, this is the military, they noted that Hamas is in Hamas's current state, a mass evacuation could turn public sentiment against Hamas. So there's this ethnic cleansing in order to pressure a government to achieve an objective that their military has failed over 20 months of genocide to achieve. The goal of Israel's war, very clear: return the captives through violence. Failed. Destroy the Qassam brigades. You're going to see for about half an hour today that is very much not been accomplished. Destroy the government. The Hamas government is willing to step down. The organization of the Palestinian state has not been collapsed on a municipal level. What gets destroyed gets rebuilt. And so they failed on that count. And the other objective was that Gaza would no longer be a threat to Israel. And after 20 months of genocide, certainly Gaza will remain a threat to Israel because you have half of the population of the Gaza Strip are children watching the worst things in the world that we've ever seen happening right in front of their eyes to their families. And they know that fighting and resisting to stay in their homeland is the only choice that Israel has given them. Israel's been carrying out an average of 150 airstrikes a day over Gaza over these past weeks, as Nora reported in her news report. If you didn't check that out, please do. She does a great job every week on that. And they're killing 100 plus people a day, 150 on Tuesday. And on Tuesday, the day they killed 150 in Gaza, the Israeli military field reports talked about less than 10, they call them terrorists, killed in Gaza. So even by the Israeli military accounts, which are wildly inflated, they're talking about less than 10 fighters killed for 150 people killed in Gaza. This is a war on civilians. We've been saying that from the very beginning. If we look at the next map, this was a rare map. I've been showing you this for the last few weeks because this is one of the rare maps from the Israeli military that's actually somewhat accurate. And you can see in this map here that the bottom on the far left, that's Rafah, which has been completely ethnically cleansed, every building in it destroyed, and Israel is setting up its it allows Yasser Abu Shabab, the collaborator gang squad, to operate in that area. You see Division 36 there pressing up on Khan Yunis just above Rafah, and you see Division 98 pushing down on Khan Yunis from the north. Division 98 is the commando division. They're the division that ran around sacking hospitals. They're responsible for sacking Shifa twice. They were responsible for sacking Nasser Hospital, and they were pulled out to go during the 12-day war with Iran. The 98th Division was pulled out. They have been returned to Gaza to the north. So Israel appears to be moving its center of gravity to the north to press on Gaza City again. Reports this morning are the 98th Division are going into Shujaiya, east of Gaza City, for now the fourth time in this war. We can take a look at, I want to show you these maps and tell you what the Israeli military is doing, because this is how you track victory and defeat, failure and success. And we've done this throughout the war, and it's failure time and time again. You'll remember when we covered the general's plan, which was supposed to be the ethnic cleansing of all of northern Gaza, which was at the end of 2024. And that operation ended with scores of Israeli soldiers killed, and them essentially accepting the ceasefire deal under threat of attack from the resistance, and that is continuing to this day. On this next map, I'll show you where we're looking in Khan Yunis, so you can see from the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs map that all of Khan Yunis is now a free fire zone. That what you see along the coast is Mawasi. That is where people have been pushed into the so-called safe zone. Now the Israeli military calls it the safer zone, because they constantly bomb the tents that are in that area along the sand dunes along the coast in Al-Mawasi. And the next map is an older map from the United Nations, where you can see the way that Khan Yunis is breaking down. You can see up in the north, Al-Qarara, there is a battalion of the Khan Yunis brigade in Al-Qarara. They have been fighting fierce battles for the last month. And there's 6 battalions in Khan Yunis, plus a Special Forces Nukba battalion is also in Khan Yunis. And you have to assume that there's a significant number of fighters from Rafah who have moved up to Khan Yunis, given the circumstances in Rafah. There will still be the Rafah brigade in Rafah, but you can imagine them moving their forces by tunnel up into this battle in Khan Yunis, because the battle in Rafah has resulted in the complete ethnic cleansing of Rafah. And that is the goal for Khan Yunis. And you can see down at the bottom of that map, Abasan al-Kabira. That is where, right near the wall, the fence into the ghetto of Gaza, you can see the fence running along the right side of that map. Fierce fighting there, which means that the Israeli military is unable to move past the first battalion of the Qassam Brigade's Khan Yunis brigade, and are still fighting in Abasan al-Kabira. We'll see lots of operations from there. Also, you see the refugee camp and the hospital. Nasser Hospital is in the refugee camp there. And the goal for the IDF, they say repeatedly, is to do to Khan Yunis what they did to Rafah. But you're going to see in these videos today that they're not doing that. They're getting met with very significant resistance. This first... Is there what? Yeah, give me the 2 evacuation maps. I always show you these 2. These are criminal maps. There's been more than 50 of these released. This is the evacuation of Khan Yunis. And the next map is the evacuation of downtown Khan Yunis, pushing people into Al-Mawasi area. I show you these maps because we want people to understand how Israel has been carrying out this ethnic cleansing. They believe that there's plausible that there's legal plausibility if they warn people ahead of time before they massacre them and commit this ethnic cleansing. That is, of course, not true at all. And what these maps are maps that will be used in the war crimes trials coming up against Israeli soldiers should justice prevail in this conflict. Let's look at number 7 here. This is the first operation. You can see fighters here moving through the tunnel. This is carried out by the same unit. You see multiple 𝐓𝐿 in this tunnel. You see 𝐓𝐡𝐞 105. You're going to see a tandem 85 as these fighters move these weapons out to the side of a supply line, again in Abasan al-Kabira on the eastern edge of Gaza. These fighters, a squad of 6 that we saw use the tunnel, is accessing this supply route through the tunnel and planting these 𝐓𝐿, EFPs, explosively formed penetrators. This is the most devastating weapon that the Qassam brigades have in their arsenal, built by hand. You can see the 2 𝐓𝐿s on this footage. This is the commander watching on a car backup camera, and you can see the 2 𝐓𝐿s there. You can see it very clearly there, and the tank drives past it and blurs it. And this is the commander commanding the operation from underground on the same closed lines that we have been talking about for 20 months that have been upholding the foundation of the resistance communications and control, which has allowed the resistance to fight despite assassinations of their top leaders. They're able to fight. And this picture that you're looking at right now is a still. You can see the fighters moving through the tunnel, holding the 𝐓𝐿 with you. The next one, you can see the commander on the closed line, and he says we need to hit them both at the same time so that neither of the Namr troop carriers get away. We'll need 𝐓𝐿 explosive devices for the first APC in this area. 2 charges will be set. We saw them set those 2 charges, and as soon as the 𝐓𝐿 go off, immediately fire the 𝐓𝐡 105s to target the second APC. The goal is to trap the 2 APCs that the resistance has been watching travel down this supply route. So that is the first half of the operation. Let's take a look at the second half of the operation here. This is the detonation. So you can see the 2 devices there on the top right. We watch them be planted, and they're going to be detonated simultaneously against this Namr troop carrier. And you just see it go off right there, destroys the camera. Again, they're using backup cameras. We've seen this all through the war. Now, this is a fighter's head cam. This is his GoPro on his head watching the same tank be hit from a second angle. And you can see that the tunnel has gotten them up into this shrubbery that they're using as concealment for the operation. So that's the first Namr getting hit simultaneously with the 2 𝐓𝐿s. The fighters immediately move into position. Here's an archer with a 𝐓𝐡 105. He spots the second Namr, just like the commander said would happen. And he launches this first 𝐓𝐡 105. You're going to watch the same archer go over, pick up the tandem 85 here, and move out and fire again on the Namr, which you can see at this point is no longer moving. The first shape charge from the 𝐓𝐡 105, it creates a dart, and the dart goes through the armor and into the cabin, and it rattles around in the cabin. We've talked about this a few times over the 20 months. The vehicle doesn't explode. It gets pierced. The armor gets pierced. And when the fighters see that, and the Israelis admitted that there was 2 injured in here, the fighters immediately descend on the vehicle. We're watching the fighters right up beside there. They're firing on portholes that could be shot from inside the tank. And here a fighter is literally going to try to open the back door of this Namr troop carrier and enter the vehicle. Now, an interesting point came out a couple days later from Army radio that said, now it can be told inside of one of the vehicles, the second vehicle in this encounter, was the senior division commander of the IDF's Southern Command. It was the chief of the 36th Division that is overseeing this battle in Khan Yunis. The Qassam fighters almost captured the commander of the 36th Division that is in charge of this operation. A remarkable operation that I'll show you here in some still pictures that just capture everything that we need to see about this. The stills here are, you're looking right from the view of the archer here. You can see his Yasin 105, and at this point you can see with the dust that the Nomier, which is a tank without a turret, the Nomier is moving. You can see the dust. He launches this Yasin 105. It pierces through the armor and wounds 2 people inside, seriously wounded inside, causes chaos and confusion inside the tank. People are trying to figure out who got hit, and they stop, which brings the next photo here, which is when he goes back and reloads. Now you can see there's no dust beside the Nomier. The Nomier is frozen. And he reloads with the Tandem 85 here, which is a 𝐶𝐐 Brigade's invention to add a second charge onto their 85 millimeter anti-tank weapon that would not penetrate the armor of the Israeli military, the new Israeli military vehicles, the Merkava tank and the Nomier troop carrier, but they added a second charge onto the front, which does allow it to penetrate just a little bit less than the Yasin 105. So the Tandem 85 is a version of the Yasin 105. And you can see the fighter here launches at the same Nomier that is now frozen in position. And inside that Nomier, they're trying to treat the wounded. The fighters then immediately attack the Nomier. In this next photo, you'll see this is what you were looking at. He's literally trying to open the door to enter the Nomier. And this is not the first time that we have seen this. We saw this actually with the first Nomiers that entered Gaza in late October 2023. The soldiers were reporting back to their command that they felt fighters trying to get these doors open. You can see the addition there on the back of slat armor. That wasn't on there at the beginning of the war. And we saw 𝐶𝐐 use various techniques to try to get inside the tank. People may remember the operation where they put a sticky bomb and then attached it right near the lock to try to blow the locking mechanism out and capture the soldiers inside, which we found out days later from Army radio was the commander of the 36th Division. To capture that, this operation is a near miss for the Israelis. It's already a spectacular operation, but to capture that commander would have been a turning point in the war for the Israelis. And that picture you're seeing right there is obviously just remarkable. The fighters able to touch the vehicle. So that was an ambush that was earlier in the month of June. I'm going to go through each of the operations that happened in Khan Yunis that we have on film. And you won't have missed anything from the week that we were away from the show. So let's take a look at number 14, another remarkable operation. We're going to watch a fighter here emerge from the tunnel, touching distance from a Nomier troop carrier. This is the tunnel apparatus in Khan Yunis. He puts the Shawaz there, you see it in front, and he pulls the detonator. He now has 5 seconds, as we've seen from the Shawaz, because the detonator cord to the fuse takes 5 seconds to burn, and that gives the fighter time to flee. That was detonated. He goes down into the tunnel, and the tunnel is obscured, so the Israelis don't find the tunnel. And this second camera that you're seeing up in the corner, it says second camera. That's a second fighter emerging to track the operation. And there was a number of these close operations with tanks. It's not clear if this was the operation. There was another operation on that day that the Israelis said that the 𝐶𝐐 fighters attached a guerrilla action device onto the cabin of their Nomier troop carrier. An IDF officer was killed and 10 others were wounded, which is the full crew and infantry squad in the back of the Nomier troop carrier. So the Israelis believe it was a guerrilla action device. Later in the day, Qassam released a field report, and they said it was a shawad. So we only see on video part of these of the total number of operations that have happened. I counted them one by one for the month of June. There was 130 qualitative operations in Khan Yunis, like you're seeing right now. What you're looking at is one of 50 Shawad versus Namr troop carriers or tanks just in the month of June. So the Israeli plan to run over and destroy Khan Yunis has been stopped by the resistance, and the Israelis are not achieving their military goals because of the tempo of the operation. And this is a report that the Army radio cited from its soldiers. They said in recent days, Israeli forces in Gaza have been reporting increased levels of friction with the resistance and an increase in number of clashes, exchanges of fire, and face-to-face contact in the field. So that was reported during the 12-day war with Iran, when Israel pulled out a number of battalions and one division, the 98th Division, were pulled out of Gaza to go deal with the border in Israel and the West Bank. And when that happened, the resistance increased the tempo of operations, and that was something that was noticed by the Israelis right away. This next operation is a booby trap tunnel. Again, we're seeing backup cameras. The backup cameras are very smart choice for the fighters. They have a low latency, they don't have a lag, and they're very cheap, and they would get through the siege on Gaza because they're just for cars. They're seen as just for cars. And there's the soldier you see go through. The tunnel is detonated, and that soldier was killed. That soldier was a member of Shabak. He was a Shabak operative, a Shin Bet operative, General Security Service in Israel, internal security officer. He was killed, and he's the 11th member of Shabak to be killed. There's the medevac for presumably him and his comrades that were in the building as well, although Israel has not been reporting its wounded of late. So we're seeing another medevac, and again in Abasan al-Kabira, the same neighborhood of Khan Yunis. This next one is the familiar Yasin Archer versus a tank. You can see this fighter's going to move through the alleyways and get into a house to get an elevated firing position, which is an advantageous position to shoot from that we've seen all through the war. Again, mouse holing through the walls. He's going to come out here in the kitchen, stand up on the sink here, and his comrade is beside him. He's going to launch this Yasin at the back of this Merkava tank. Clearly a direct hit, as you're going to see from this video multiple times. The Israelis said one soldier was killed and one soldier was wounded in that strike. And there was a number of Yasin operations that had casualties. A couple days later, 2 more soldiers were wounded in a Yasin strike. And the Yasins versus tanks, we saw this 10 times over the last 3+ weeks or so. 28 Yasin ops altogether, if you count the attacks on the D9s and the armored personnel carriers. The D9 is what you're going to see in this next clip. This is a tandem 85 versus the D9. Again, using appropriate weapons. There's no need to use the Yasin 105 on these bulldozers because the tandem 85 does the job. And so that's why we see the fighters choosing their weapons wisely. We've pointed this out all through the war. We call it appropriate weapons. They're not just using what's lying around, they're using what is necessary. And none of these show any sign of dwindling of supplies or unavailability of supplies. This also resulted in 2 soldiers wounded. The bulldozers, as I've shown you before, have 2 people in the cockpit. They have a driver and a commander, and both were seriously wounded in this attack. This was the deadliest month. June was the deadliest month for the Israeli military in over a year of fighting, taking you back into the main days of the battle in 23 and early 2024, when they had 5 divisions in Gaza fighting all across Gaza. In this case, they're concentrated on one city and feeling and getting casualty rates that they haven't got in a year. So the Khan Yunis Brigade is clearly at full force here. The next one is another Shawad. We get a lot of these operations. Like I said, there's been 40 of these versus tanks alone. Again, a backup camera. They're cheap, low latency, so that there's no lag, which means that they can detonate like they just did at the exact split second that's necessary. And that's what you're seeing there. And now you're seeing it from a second angle from the spotter, and that's a pretty remarkable shot that you can see there. That's what the Shawaz looks like from a distance. And that was from the spotter, so we saw it. And then the medevac helicopters, again, telltale sign that you have multiple wounded, and you're seeing these in all of these videos. You're also seeing the fighters return to their base safely in each of these operations, something that the Israelis have been pointing out in the field reports of their own, that they attempted to encircle and find the fighters that are carrying out these operations, and they're failing. So that you see again from two angles versus that Namr troop carrier. And here's from the distance, which is something we don't get to see all the time from the distance. You can see it's a devastating weapon when it's deployed. Keep that in mind, because there's a couple more Shawad operations coming up that if that's how devastating it is, you'll see in these next operations why the death toll for Israel is so high. This is a sniper operation. This has to be edited. Maybe Tamara can throw up my Twitter on the bottom, because we had to edit this. But you can see the sniper here hitting an Israeli soldier. That's a well-known shot that played big on the internet, I think, because of the timing of it. But you can see again using what are presumed to be Israeli ammunition, which we saw the Khan Yunis Brigade showing off last year during the first battle of Khan Yunis, that they had captured a bunch of Israeli 50 cal rounds, which are the rounds for the Al-Ghul, and the Qassam unit in Khan Yunis was saying, here's the bullet. They showed us the markings of the IMI, Israeli Military Industries, and then they loaded it into the weapon and shot Israeli soldiers. I did a report on that back in early 2024 during the battle in Khan Yunis. And then this next sniper shot, there's a couple interesting things about this sniper shot. Also had to be heavily edited, but this sniper gets two shots, gets two soldiers with one shot. There's the medevac. When it comes back around, loop it back one more time for us, Tamara, because watch how the fighter, the sniper, watch him immediately tear down his setup and move. He's going to fire here, and now he's immediately tearing down his setup, and he's moving, and he's getting out of that position because because of counterfire. A lot of people ask, why do they not keep shooting from these sniper positions? And the reason is because the Israelis have systems that can track where the shot was from, and they'll hit that spot. So the sniper gets in position, lays there in secret all day, sometimes for multiple days, fires, and then is instantly breaking down his setup, and he's getting out of there. He's scooting, as they say, because incoming fire is potentially coming. And if you fire a second time, the ability to track becomes significantly greater. So two remarkable sniper operations of the three sniper operations that Qassam carried out in the past few weeks. Now we're going to look at a Suraya Al-Quds operation here. This is twin anti-tank guided missiles, wire-guided anti-tank missile systems. One that we have seen before, but one, the 9K-111 Bassoon. It's a Russian wire-guided anti-tank missile. Here the video is showing you that this is a command position, that the Israeli soldiers are using it. We're watching them access this building. These two buildings are going to be the target. One is a command center, one is a special forces position. and they're showing us excavators here. They're showing us that they know what they're hitting. And here it comes, a weapon we haven't seen in this entire war, the 9K-111 here being set up. We saw Hezbollah use this weapon. It's a similar class, a little bit, not quite as good as a Kornet, but similar class of weapon. And this is a 𝐓𝐿𝐿𝐿. We've seen 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿 use this weapon throughout the war at times. It was also used on October 7th. And here the two fighters are setting up to fire simultaneously, which again helps the fighters with defensive positioning after firing, because they can fire at the same time, tear down their stuff, and get out of there before counterfire hits. And you can see, because it's wire guided, you're controlling, the fighter is controlling through the wire that coils out underneath, behind the missile. It's basically being driven right on target. And that weapon hasn't been used all war. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 said this was a joint operation with the Popular Resistance Committees, so it's possible that this is a Popular Resistance Committee weapon that they have kept the powder dry on for 20, coming up now on 21 months of the war. Clearly a devastating weapon. Again, casualties on this operation, and this was one of more than 20 attacks against Israeli troop positions in Khan Yunis. So 2 wire-guided anti-tank missile attacks there. Another 𝐓𝐡𝐞 operation here. This is a return to sender operation. The fighter here is writing on the mines, "Here are your goods being returned to you," as he's writing them on. These are M15 American-made, supplied to the Israelis, anti-tank. They're supposed to be anti-tank weapons, but the Israelis, as we know, have been using these for house demolitions. They wire them up all together and blow up houses with them as a more economical way of doing it. So he puts the plastic explosives in here because the Israelis take the fuse. So that is the return to sender operations rely on replacing the fuse. We see the fighters outside here, sheltered by trees, so drones can't see them, digging the hole for these. These are in a stack like this, they're a significant weapon. We've seen them take out tanks before with these stacks, and then they're totally buried as they were in this case, so completely concealed. They're going to show us from the spotter as the tank arrives to that position. You can see it there. There's the mark of a tank going into the position, and it's hit. And there's an excavator as well that we're going to see here that's part of this unit. You can see it there. Excavator doing house demolitions. A number of excavators were targeted during this time. We don't have any on film, but there's a number in the field report. And there you can see from the spotter the detonation that the pressure plate that the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 fighters put, as soon as the heavy vehicle goes over it, it detonates, which is what we are seeing in that case. And there's another operation coming up after this one on the same video of the similar sort by 𝐓𝐡𝐞. Here they are creating, this is a second operation. They're creating a pressure plate here, writing 𝐓𝐡𝐞 on it, on the wood from the pressure plate. And essentially the pressure plate gets pressed down by something heavy and it detonates the explosive. So you can see how it's hooked up to, that's a 𝐓𝐡𝐞. It's the explosively formed penetrator. It's the shawad that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 uses. And they bury it here also in a minefield. You can see other explosives being planted here in a minefield. Again, we're seeing them use a flattened out iron stake as the shovel. Probably a good tool to be using. I mean, it shows ingenuity to be building your own tools, but for a lot of reasons, that stake would be good for this hard ground. So there's multiple EFPs now buried in the ground, waiting for the Israeli armored vehicles. Here we see a tank. There you see a D9 armored bulldozer by Caterpillar and another D9 armored bulldozer. It's not clear which one of the three drives over it, but we're about to watch that detonate. And you can see the multiple secondary explosions there from the principal EFPs, but also from the minefield that was set. It's possible they got multiple vehicles with that operation. They showed it again for you on a loop. These are devastating weapons. The Americans, much smaller versions of these weapons, killed a lot of soldiers in American soldiers in Iraq during the Iraq War. And 𝐓𝐿 and 𝐄𝐥𝐿 have improved upon those weapons from that battle. Now, this is the remarkable operation that I think a lot of the audience of this show has seen already. This is the operation where two 𝐓𝐿 fighters, but one in particular, throws a 𝐄𝐥𝐿 inside of the open hatch of a Puma combat engineering vehicle, armored personnel carrier. This is the full video. A number of these videos from Khan Yunis came out because of operational security. They came out days later. But this operation was so spectacular, and it was in the news in Israel, that they released this footage in less than 24 hours. So command and control, the ability to share this media, to record it, share it, process it, and publish it, all happening in less than 24 hours. Here you see the fighters moving into position. They're concealed, and they're on this. The intelligence, reconnaissance, and surveillance behind this operation is top notch, and that is why the mission is successful. This is not a fluke operation. You can watch this happen all throughout the day. You can see by the sunlight that this is being carried out all through the day. We're seeing Namr troop carriers, which are much more heavily armored than the Puma combat engineering vehicles, and we've seen those driving all over around here. They're not going to be the target of this operation. These fighters are using the rubble in Khan Yunis, the destroyed buildings, because the goal is to attack and make it unlivable for civilians. But the fighters are using that as cover here. And now when you're looking straight ahead there, you see the berms. There you see the 𝐄𝐥𝐿 EFP right in front of him there that he's going to use. But you see those berms that are all up. Those are berms that the Israeli military built in the first Battle of Khan Yunis last year. And those berms, you'll see when the fighter gets up close to it, they're overgrown at this point because the grass and weeds have grown on them in the year since. So you can see these fighters wait. Here you're going to see one fighter. He's got a guerrilla action device. He runs off. He goes to the left of the berm. He's going to attach that guerrilla action device to a Puma. And then our fighter that we're going to go along with the helmet cam, the fighter that we watched from the helmet cam, he's going to go up to this berm, use it for cover, and then he's going to come peek his head around the berm. And because they've been watching these positions, they know that these Puma troop carriers have their hatches open, which he could see from the building in that last shot. So he's got the 35 kilo 𝐄𝐥𝐿 EFP, and he's going to climb up on top of this armored vehicle and literally drop it right inside the hatch, where there's at least 7 soldiers inside. The Puma carries 8 inside. He's going to throw it and drop it directly into the hole. 𝐓𝐿 shows us on this video multiple times, but here you can see it go right into the hole. And like I said from the previous one, he's got about 5 or 6 seconds, 5 seconds to get out of there before it goes off. And when he turns and runs back, you're going to see that the guerrilla action device also went off on the second one. Here it is coming. Here you see it. See there in the upper corner there, you can see the blast. That's from the first fighter that we saw go. And then right here, you're going to see the blast also. You see the red of the flames as he's running away here, returning to his base safely. He runs clean through this fence here, knocks off his GoPro, but he fixes it immediately to keep the shot and returns to his base safely. Both the armored personnel carriers explode in flames, and this was a devastating hit. This was a hit that got to the Israelis. Both Netanyahu and Abu Ubaidah commented on this, but I'm going to read you this at length. This was the Army radio statement of this operation. It targeted the 605th Engineering Battalion in Khan Yunis. The battalion fighters are fighting under the 188th Armored Brigade in Khan Yunis. The fighters advanced in conquering the area in Khan Yunis, carrying out attacks on Hamas targets, destroying buildings, and locating underground shafts. Yesterday at 5:30 p.m., the first report was received of a Puma armored personnel carrier engineering vehicle that caught fire. The initial investigation indicates that one fighter approached the APC and attached an explosive device to it. The explosive device exploded, causing the entire APC to catch fire. The military firefighting forces were dispatched to the scene to make efforts to extinguish the burning APC with the full crew inside. As part of one of the exercises being conducted to extinguish the fires, a D9 armored bulldozer brought sand and poured it on, but that did not work. The decision was then made on the ground. We will tow the APC back to Israeli territory and allow firefighting efforts to continue there. So Israel tows back that burning APC with all of its crew inside it burning all the way back to Israel, which would have taken some time. Army radio points, long hours were required to identify the fallen after the identification process, because the APC was just left by the Israeli military to burn for the presumably multiple hours it would have taken to tow the burning carrier all the way back to Israel. Netanyahu had to make a statement, but Abu Obaida also made a statement. He said, "Our fighters are demonstrating unique examples of heroism and daring, and the recent ambushes are a living testament to history, proving that our people's fighters are the most courageous and self-sacrificing freedom fighters in the modern era. The funerals and bodies of enemy soldiers will become a constant occurrence, God willing, as long as the occupation's aggression and its criminal war against our people continue. The enemy's government is deceiving its public and ignoring the fact that it is throwing its soldiers into the mire of Gaza for illusory political aims." And clearly, they are not winning this war, as these operations show. Just from the last 3 weeks, the most deadly month for Israeli fighters in a year. And the goal of overrunning Khan Yunis is not happening, because the Israeli military is stuck fighting each of the 6 battalions of the Khan Yunis brigade, who have been waiting and preparing for 14 months for this second battle of Khan Yunis. So that is the resistance report for this week, for day 636 of this battle.
Thank you so much, Jon. So much packed into that report. The question I think I have just quickly before we turn to the discussion is like, what is the logic of keeping that hatch open on the APC? Is it the same kind of logic that allows the soldiers to also stand in front of windows? Like, why would they have kept the hatch open?
Yeah, it's hot, I think, is the basic answer. It's hot. Yeah. But what we saw when we had the helmet cam, the head cam, they're not wearing helmets, the head cam GoPro, is we saw that fighter looking around from inside the house, and he was able to identify that Puma carrier had its hatch open. Mm. And when he runs up to it, if we look to the left, you can see there's a Nommer right there with air conditioning, with the hatch closed. And so he goes to the target because they've been watching that target all day. And I think, there was some talk in the Israeli press of like, oh, this was a failure of the Israeli military. It shows that they're, a failure of their protocols or whatever. But that's not really the case. What you're seeing is intelligence, reconnaissance, and surveillance on site, choosing targets. And if they make the smallest mistake, that target is then hit. Because he could have climbed up on that APC and not had a hatch up. If that had happened, he would have placed the APC, he would have placed the 𝐓𝐡𝐿 in front of the APC and directed the charge into the armored vehicle. But because he sees the hatch open, he throws it right in. We don't see what happens with the second fighter the first fighter who went to the left with the guerrilla action device, but he may have just affixed that on the outside of the vehicle because the hatch wasn't open, and it exploded and created 2 fires that Israel had to deal with. And there was 7 killed and reports of 17 wounded in that operation. And just remarkable that the decision the Israeli military made was, let's not put out the fire. Let's drag the burning vehicle with all our guys in it all the way back to Israel. And then they drag it back to Israel and they can't identify who anyone is because they've been burning in there for extended period of time. And these are the kind of operations that these can turn the war, because at home, the funerals for these soldiers, the mothers are saying, he was tired, he wanted to come home, he said, get me out of here. They're not saying, he was a brave soldier for the safety of the state of Israel. They're saying they didn't want to be there. He was tired, and this war can't go on, the mothers of the dead soldiers say. Like, that kind of pressure, and that was that kind of pressure that led to the withdrawal from Lebanon in 2000, right? Steady resistance attacks by Hezbollah, but ultimately a helicopter crash was the sort of straw that broke the camel's back in South Lebanon. So these have major psychological impact, both for the resistance to show that they're here, but also for the Israelis that show that your military operation has been a failure.
It's just a meat grinder. Yeah. Ali, did you have a...
Well, it's just, those videos, particularly the one of the hand delivery of the device to the troop carrier, were big news over the last period while I was in Jordan. So the impact on public opinion is enormous, both among Palestinians and the broader Arab public who are watching this. And that's important because you don't really see that in Western media. Gaza is talked about only, to the extent that it's talked about, only as a site of starvation and suffering, which it is. All of that is true because that's what Israel is inflicting. But that element of the fact that the resistance, in terms of its ability to fight, seems to be as strong, if not stronger, than at the beginning of this war, is left out of so much of the discussion. And you just cannot understand the situation without knowing that. What was it just a couple of months ago that we were told that Netanyahu had a new plan to take over all of Gaza, and this time we're here to stay? And that also reflected on what happened with the war in the Israeli war in Iran, because when the Israelis would make these announcements, we've destroyed 50% of the Iranian mobile rocket launches, we've destroyed 80% of the Iranian air defenses, it all sounded like their big, bold pronouncements about Gaza. We've destroyed the Khan Yunis battalion, we've destroyed the Jabalia battalion, we have full operational control. And here we are, 20 months in, and to use one of Jon's phrases from early on, they're getting smoked.
Yeah, they are. And the fact that the Khan Yunis brigade is just that prepared for battle, I think it's really significant. And I'm hearing from people on the ground that they're hearing these operations all throughout the day. They're hearing the ground explosions. We're seeing it, like I said, 130 qualitative operations in Khan Yunis alone, plus in addition 60 artillery operations that are in addition to that. So you're coming up on 200 resistance operations, more than 20 months into this war, in a place that the Israeli military, they said they were going to go take all this territory. That's why I showed you the maps at the beginning, because they say, we're going to move and take all this territory, and that they fail at that. They failed in Jabalia, in the north, in Beit Hanun. They said they conquered Beit Hanun 5 times, and none of the times were true. And now they're fighting in Khan Yunis against a very formidable resistance, clearly, and still has cameras to show us, even though it's only a fraction of them that we see on camera. They're able to carry out these operations. They even pointed out that in that first video I showed you, it was the same unit, the very same guys that carried out the Night of Power ambush, which was the end of Ramadan ambush in Khan Yunis. That was that multi-stage ambush. They killed more than a dozen Israeli soldiers, and the Israelis pulled out of Khan Yunis the next morning. They were gone by sunup the next day after that operation. And then they come back in a year, I guess it's 14 months later, and they're immediately hit.
Well,
as they are in 𝐄𝐥𝐿. They just went into 𝐄𝐥𝐿 today, and immediately there's 8 casualties. There's multiple operations in 𝐄𝐥𝐿 that we'll get into next week, because 𝐄𝐥𝐿 has been basically erased too, because that's the only strategy that Israel can do, is to destroy property of people who have moved, because all the fighting is happening in areas where civilians are gone from. That's the other thing they don't tell you in Western media, is that we've been watching for 20 months and we have never seen a civilian in any video, not even off on the side. They're never there. The resistance fights exclusively in areas that have been depopulated by Israel's massacres and evacuations, which go hand in hand, right? We saw the massacres that Nora had in her report from Gaza City. Those massacres come before the evacuation notice. They massacre people so that they get people's attention. Then they issue the evacuation notice. That was 2 days ago. Today, they take 8 casualties, 2 killed, multiple operations. So 𝐄𝐥𝐿 is still in the battle as well.
Wow. Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to that report for next week for sure. I mean, whenever we mention 𝐄𝐥𝐿, immediately we all think of our friend Dr. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿, who was the son of 𝐄𝐥𝐿, of course, and his spirit still lives on.
And he was deeply proud of the resistance.
He was.
He was proud to be from
site
there.
of many, many battles that Palestinians have won over and over and over again.
And that's what's happening in these destroyed places. There's a pride in being from Khan Yunis, where you're defending yourself against the biggest military in the region and the most expensive military in the world, handing them everything they need on a daily basis, and your fighters are defeating them. There's no other way to say it. They're being defeated. They're not achieving their goals. They're taking heavy casualties, and it's not. It's a defeat.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Jon. There's so much more. Obviously, we could discuss about this, but we'll save some of it for next week. Hi, Asa.
Hi.
Asa, you've been reporting on Palestine Action, which is in the news heavily this week, especially today in the UK. Tell us what's going on, what you've been talking about in terms of, you have direct contact with activists who are involved with Palestine Action, and what the UK government is trying to do.
Well, will it still be legal to do this reporting soon? The answer is yes, but we just don't know how the British state is going to act. That's the reality. Well, yeah, so thanks, Nora. We published this story that we can see on screen here of mine over the weekend, and I've been following developments on this story since then. The story, of course, is that Britain's Home Secretary 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞 informed Parliament last week that she wanted to outlaw the protest group Palestine Action. by adding them to the list of proscribed groups under the Terrorist Act of 2000, the year 2000. Palestine Action are renowned for the direct action they take against UK subsidiaries of 𝐓𝐿𝐵IT, which is Israel's largest arms manufacturer. Palestine Action were founded in August 2020, and so far in the last 5 years, they've shut down 3 𝐓𝐵IT sites in the UK, 2 arms factories, and plus 𝐓𝐵IT's former headquarters in London. And as you can see on the screen here, we've reported on them many times. Back in September 2020, very early on, Nora, if you remember, we actually interviewed Palestine Action co-founder 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 on the 𝐓𝐿 podcast, back when it was only audio.
The Jurassic period, yeah.
I think that must have been one of Palestine Action's first ever interviews by any media outlet. So, yeah. Well, Israel and its influential representatives in the UK have for years lobbied the British government to outlaw Palestine Action. The former Conservative government didn't do so. They didn't dare to do it. But now the Labour government, which is funded by the Israel lobby and dominated by Labour Friends of Israel, has decided to do so. And despite a storm of protests in the House of Commons yesterday, in the country, the House of Commons yesterday voted to approve the ban. And you can see here on this chart here, only a small minority of lawmakers voted against it. There was 26 who voted against it, and 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 cynically bundled 2 dubiously obscure neo-Nazi groups into the vote. So it was an all or nothing vote. You either had to vote to prescribe them all, or vote against prescribing them all. So it was obviously a cynical move to kind of confuse some of the lawmakers, and it actually browbeat some of the MPs who've been supportive of Palestine Action in the past into abstaining, which you can see on the chart there. Some of the Scottish and Welsh parliamentarians ended up abstaining. And that was due to the confusion of the neo-Nazi groups. Well, as we've been streaming tonight, the House of Lords, which is Britain's unelected upper chamber, actually rubber-stamped the ban. And so that means that unless the emergency legal intervention, which was launched by Palestine Action on Monday, is successful at the High Court tomorrow, the ban will go into effect at midnight on Friday night. So technically it's legal right now.
And what will that mean in effect, Asa? What will it mean for Palestine Action and for everyone else?
Yeah, well, it will mean that they could face up to 14 years in prison. Membership or support of Palestine Action could potentially lead to, being charged. It's a very, very serious. The Palestine Action up until now have only been charged with non-terror charges, like just criminal damage essentially is the main one that they use, and that quite often it's not 14 years anyway, even if they're found to be guilty of it. So this is it's a very, very serious escalation.
So Asa, there was a statement yesterday from some of the UN special rapporteurs about this, because basically the UK government is prescribing and criminalizing Palestine Action as a terrorist group. And how is that being looked at? Talk more about what the UN statement said, or the statement from the special rapporteur. I think it was Irene Khan.
just one more. I'm getting to that. Just one more point on this. The thing about the court, the details of the court. So it will get, as I said, it will go into effect at midnight on Friday night, unless there's this legal intervention. So Palestine Action have called for protests for 10:30 a.m. on Friday morning outside the Royal Courts of Justice in London, and there, in an urgent hearing, a High Court judge will rule on Palestine Action co-founder Huda Amouri's application for what's termed interim relief. Now, that means that interim relief would stop the ban from coming into effect for now. So, it is possible. It is possible that the ban could sort of be frozen pending a full determination of the judicial review into the ban. So, as you said, Ali, that we've had protests from not just activists, but from some, very high-profile UN, high-profile human rights groups, civil liberties groups, and even UN experts. And there's really been a storm of protests in the last 2 weeks, and that's because the ban is so draconian. And as I said, if it goes into force on Saturday, it means that membership of Palestine Action could be punished by up to 14 years in prison. And not only that, anyone expressing support to Palestine Action or engaging in conduct deemed to be reckless encouragement of support for Palestine Action could also be punished with up to 14 years in jail. So, would this live stream be deemed to be, if we were having this live stream next week, would it be deemed to be support or reckless encouragement of Palestine Action?
Just by talking about it.
Exactly. It's hard.
Yeah,
it's hard
and
to say.
so we can expect to see more police raids and more arrests and more. So it's really giving the government another tool to go after the Palestine solidarity movement as a whole. And just remind us, Asa, I know you want to mention what the UN special rapporteur said. Well, why don't you go ahead and do that, and then I'll ask my question.
All right. Well, so because of the severe nature of these potential sentences for membership or support of Palestine Action, that's why Irene Khan, the UN Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of the right to freedom of opinion and expression, along with 4 other UN Special Rapporteurs, have spoken against the ban. And they said in this statement, quote, "We are concerned at the unjustified labelling of a political protest movement as terrorist," the expert said. "According to international standards, acts of protest that damage property but are not intended to kill or injure people should not be treated as terrorism." Now, next part is really interesting. There's no binding definition of terrorism in international law. The whole we tend to try and avoid this term anyway, because there's no binding definition of it. It's very extremely politicized word. While there's no binding definition of terrorism in international law, best practice international standards limit terrorism to criminal acts intended to cause death, serious personal injury, or hostage taking. It's interesting because I was trying, in discussions about this with people, I can't think of any other group on this so-called terrorist list, British terrorist list, and I know the United States has a similar one. I can't think of a single other group that doesn't use bombs or guns. Palestine Action does not do that. It's essentially
paint.
Yeah,
on weapons that slaughter children.
They use hammers and they use tools to destroy weapons factories and weapons parts that will be used to kill people. So, and I think it's worth reminding people that in the several instances where the British authorities actually charged and prosecuted members of Palestine Action for smashing up arms factories, they were actually acquitted by juries on the basis that they were acting in defense of others, because in the law, you can act in self-defense or in defense of others. And they made a case that juries accepted that what they were doing was necessary, even though it involved damage to property. It was necessary to defend Palestinians in Gaza from these weapons. And so juries of their peers accepted that. And so my question is, Asa, is it because the British public seems to largely understand or support what Palestine Action is doing, if those jury trials are evidence of that, that they're now moving to this more draconian measure where simply expressing an idea is now a crime?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I mean, I think it's exactly because Palestine Action has been so effective that they are using these really extreme powers. They've been kind of moving towards this for a while. I detailed it in my article that we showed at the beginning. The police quite early on were threatening Palestine Action activists with terrorism charges, but they couldn't do it. There's no terrorism for them to charge them with. Yeah. So they couldn't get that past a judge or a jury. And even, the criminal damage, as you said, juries and magistrates, which is, a lower level judge, juries and magistrates were often acquitting Palestine Action activists in the early stages of their campaign with that, using that proportionality defense and a justified action to stop a crime. But increasingly those defenses have been disallowed, and they used counterterrorism powers, most notably with the Filton 18, Palestine Action's most high-profile political prisoners. But despite, and it's because they've been so effective, they've had so much support as well. And we saw that again at Glastonbury Music Festival on the weekend. Several acts there spoke out against the ban. DJ Provi of the Irish language rap group Knee Gap actually donned a t-shirt that said, "We are all Palestine Action." And the singer-songwriter Nadine Shah read out an impassioned statement on stage. The actors Tilda Swinton, Steve Coogan, and Billy Howlett are among those signing a statement saying, quote, "Palestine Action has intervened to stop a genocide, is acting to save life." But what is going to happen? I mean, I'm asking myself the question.
I mean, what if another group or several groups emerge? What if a group doing the same actions as Palestine Action, but it calls itself, Care Bears and Cupcakes, emerges, and 12, 15, 20, 100 other groups similarly emerge and take up what Palestine Action has historically done in terms of being, literally a wrench in the gears of the Western slaughter machine. Are the actions being prosecuted, or is it specifically just the group called Palestine Action? Do you know how we can differentiate that?
A lot of people are asking these questions right now. And I think the reality is we just don't know, because this is a truly unprecedented situation. Yeah. Like for a protest group in Britain to be banned, put on the terrorist list. This is a list that includes Al-Qaeda and ISIS.
Right.
you know, as well as the, you know, the political wings of Hamas and Hezbollah and other groups, other armed group, other groups that are connected to armed groups.
Well, and like the white supremacist groups that I'm sure aren't going to be immediately prosecuted, like Palestine Action is, right? Like that was just kind of a, it was a symbolic gesture.
And the context here is that this is the same UK that is aiding and abetting this genocide and has done nothing to move to arrest Israeli war criminals who are surely on British territory, not just talking about the ones who are indicted by the International Criminal Court, but there's probably UK-Israeli dual nationals who've participated in war crimes or crimes against humanity, and they've made they haven't outlawed British subjects, as you are. You're not citizens. Legally speaking, you're subjects. They've not banned British subjects, as far as I know, from joining the Israeli army and going to participate in genocide.
Yeah, no, they haven't, and it's you know, it's a complete double standard. But a lot of people are asking about this. We've seen a really interesting development where a new group, which says it's inspired by Palestine Action and it is taking up the mantle of direct action against 𝐓𝐿𝐵𝐻, and it has called itself 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞, in exactly the same name as the Home Secretary. So
that sounded familiar. Interesting.
Yeah, so that's that'll be interesting to see what happens. But Palestine Action supporters that I spoke to a protest in support of the Filton 18 outside Woolwich Crown Court on Monday and Tuesday this week were adamant when I asked them about it. They said that direct action against 𝐓𝐿𝐵𝐻's drone factories in the UK will continue no matter what, you know, no matter the names of the groups or whatever happens, or the penalties people will have to pay. That was the mood at those demonstrations. And there's even talk of civil disobedience against the Terrorist Act. So the renowned novelist and screenwriter Sally Rooney, I mentioned this in my article, wrote in The Guardian last weekend saying that, quote, "I can only say that I admire and support Palestine Action wholeheartedly, and I will continue to, whether that becomes a terrorist offence or not." You know, she's Irish, she lives in Ireland, but you know, if she comes to the UK and she's for another award, for books or whatever, is she going to be arrested by the British government? Will they want to make an example of her? You know, we don't know. We don't know.
No, go ahead.
Well, there was also the Guardian columnist George Monbiot who said something interesting yesterday that we've got a video clip of.
Government,
play a little bit
building on the work of its predecessors, is shutting down our fundamental rights to protest. This, I believe, needs to be our I'm Spartacus moment, where one after another we stand up and say, I support Palestine Action. I support Palestine Action. If tens of thousands of us do that, well, what are they going to do? Are they going to arrest and jail us all as sympathizers with terrorism just by saying that we support a non-violent protest movement? Are they going to put us all in handcuffs and walk us all away? Well, let's find out. I support Palestine Action, and I want you to say the same. Unlike so much of the rest of the media, Double Down News...
Thanks, Tamara. I think that it's interesting. Like, I think the real test here would come if Monbiot or others actually repeated those words if and when the ban comes into effect on Saturday. Well, you know, assuming that it's not stopped by the legal action, which could still happen, but just assuming it does go into effect on Saturday, What happens is the government going to start rounding up the most active Palestine Action activists to make an example of them. It will George Monbiot repeat what he said in that video. And if he does, are they going to arrest George Monbiot, a very high profile, British journalist? It's kind of an unprecedented situation, so we don't know how far they'll go or what they're going to do.
Well, thanks. Yeah. No, go ahead.
While we were listening to that, I looked at the legislation, and under the provision of the Terrorism Act 2000 that they used, if they suspect that the organization continues to operate under a different name, the order prescribing them and declaring them a terrorist organization still applies. Of course, you'd have to prove that it's the same organization with a different name. But what all that means is that this is, so if, to answer your question, Nora, if another group emerges calling itself whatever it might call itself, well, the police could go after them just to say, well, we need to find out if this is Palestine Action under a different name. So my suspicion is that they will, based on what we've seen from the really draconian Keir Starmer crackdown on free speech and democratic rights in the UK, which even exceeds that of the previous Conservative government, as far as I can tell, they will use these powers broadly, again, to suppress Palestine solidarity more generally. This is targeted, or appears to be targeted at Palestine Action, but what's going to give them, in their minds, a license to do is to escalate their crackdown against the movement as a whole. And people, I think, I can't, I don't want to say what people in the UK should or should not do, but it gets to the point where if everyone is saying we are Palestine Action or I support Palestine Action, as George Monbiot suggested there, then it sort of becomes like an I am Spartacus moment. If everyone is saying it, they can't prosecute everyone, and it makes the law appear to be as ridiculous as we know it to be. So this is designed to suppress support for Palestine, to suppress any form of protest or resistance to British complicity and participation in the Holocaust of our time. And people have to not let that intimidation succeed, as we will not let the intimidation succeed, whether it's happening in the US or other parts of Europe. People have to keep speaking out.
Yeah, I know we need to round up, Nora, but just one more article that I wanted to show is there was a telling revelation in The Guardian on Saturday. Speaking anonymously to the paper, a senior official in Yvette Cooper's department, the Home Office, said, quote, so this journalist in The Guardian, Harun Sadiq, has got an inside source in the Home Office, a leaker essentially, and he or she said this, quote, "My colleagues and I were shocked by the announcement of the ban. All week, the office has been a very tense atmosphere, charged with concern about treating a non-violent protest group the same as actual terrorist organizations like ISIS, and the dangerous precedent this sets. From desk to desk, colleagues are exchanging concerned and bemused conversations about how absurd this is and how impossible it will be to enforce. Are they really going to prosecute as terrorists everyone who expresses support for Palestine Action's work to disrupt the flow of arms to Israel as it commits war crimes? It's ridiculous and is being widely condemned in anxious conversations internally as a blatant misuse of anti-terror laws for political purposes to clamp down on protests which are affecting the profits of arms companies," end of quote. So that's and that's a civil servant saying that, so that's really interesting. And one Palestine Action source did tell me on Tuesday that they'd had at least 1,000 new recruits since the ban idea was floated in that leak in an initial announcement.
Well, thank you for keeping us up to date on that. I know you're going to have a lot more coming in terms of reporting and analysis. So thanks, Asa. And let's take a look at the website. I'm still catching up from my short break, but there's so much to read. There's some brilliant analysis by our staff writers, of course. There's Dave Cronin's latest, Settler urging extreme violence, enjoys high-level access in Brussels. Do not miss that one. Maureen Claire Murphy, our senior editor, I quoted from her latest news post in my report. She has a whole deep analysis on kind of the general situation, the just a horrific situation for children in Gaza right now. There
was during the 2 weeks we were off from the regular live stream, Asa and I recorded a fantastic conversation with Mohammed Shahade about Israel's support for these ISIS-linked gangs in Gaza. And so if you haven't watched that yet, I highly recommend it. Mohammed is so informative and so knowledgeable about why and how Israel is supporting these criminal gangs, some of them affiliated with ISIS, in Gaza, and what they're trying to achieve with that. So that was that was a really good conversation.
Yeah, thanks for doing that. Fantastic. That is so much more. There's the standalone podcast interview that I did with members of the Mask Off Merce campaign and the Palestinian youth movement. Tamara wrote a fantastic post, also with some news updates on the Merce campaign. Ali, you mentioned earlier in the show that Merce itself is now pulling out of deals with Israeli settlements, which is one step of many that they should be taking, but it is an important step. So check that out. Of course, Jon's analysis on the first few days of the Israeli attacks on Iran.
Yeah, and that's actually included in one of my articles. I mean, you'll find it on the YouTube channel, but it's also in one now something of a blur. Yeah, I think it's the one. Here we go. Yeah, Israeli media censors Iranian strike on cyber warfare base, and Jon's report is included in there. And I also talk about how about this major Israeli army cyber warfare base in Beersheba that was hit, and some of the background on that, which you will not read in any mainstream media accounts, because they all, even if they're outside Israel, they all abide by the Israeli censorship. It's incredible.
Yeah, they don't want to lose access. Right.
But this was all open source information. I was able to piece together exactly where they hit and what they hit just by, doing sort of an open source investigation of it. So that was instructive too.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Ali. And of course, our incredible features by our writers who are in Gaza, right there on the front page under our features banner. So please go check everything out that we have published in the last few weeks. Ali, did you want to say something about our monthly donors?
I want to say something about everyone who is continuing to support us, and we're so grateful. I will mention, I just want to shout out a few people who have given gifts recently, and we're so grateful to each and every person. I can't name everyone, but I just want to acknowledge a few. William, Carrie, Mashhour, Jean-Pierre, Brett, Asim, Tariq, Adil, Young, Nasreen, and Jairam, among the many people who have made one-time gifts or who have committed to make a monthly gift, which is one of the best ways you can sustain our work, because it it makes life predictable for us, and we can focus all our energy on doing this work, on producing first-class independent journalism that gives you the truth about what's happening in Palestine. We don't pull punches. We say things as they are. And as you know, everything we say, we go to great pains to be extremely accurate and factual. And that's why I think independent media is in the crosshairs as well as activism, because Israel and its supporters are losing control of the narrative. So you strengthen us with your support, and we're incredibly grateful for it. And as ever, when you support us, you help to make this information available for everyone, because it will always be free of charge for everyone. We will never have a paywall or ask people to sign up for a subscription to access any of our articles or our interviews or anything like that. So if you can give, then you make it possible for everyone in the world to access this information. And if you can't give, please don't. We don't want people to be under financial strain in order to give to us. You support us in all the other ways that you can, by sharing the work we do, by telling people about us, particularly, and this is very dear to my heart, sharing the articles by our writers in Gaza, because they are being silenced globally, and this is one of the outlets. The Electronic Intifada, we're very proud, is one of the outlets through which their voices can be heard by the world. And thank you too for all the, I was traveling for the past few weeks. I'm just back to the US. So one of the pleasures is reading through the Electronic Intifada mailbag and reading all the wonderful cards and notes that people send, as well as the emails. And we had a lovely note. I'll just read one of them. Thank you, and this is addressed to all of us at the Electronic Intifada. Thank you for all you do. I am 76 years old and disabled and can't do much, but I can and do pray that the siege will end and Gaza will be free. Maybe not in my lifetime, but it will happen. Keep fighting the good fight. May you be encouraged and strengthened as you fight to win. Thank you for that beautiful card and those wonderful words. Pat in Michigan, we really take them to heart.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you to everybody who's been watching and listening and reading and sharing our articles, as Ali said. And of course, thank you to our incredible team at the Electronic Intifada, Tamara Nassar, who directs and produces this program. Thank you, Tamara, for all your hard work. Eli Gerzon for social media production. We have Maureen Claire Murphy, our senior editor, and Michael F. Brown for fact-checking. Everyone at the Electronic Intifada, Pierre Loisel for putting the radio program together, of course. And on behalf of all of us at EI, myself, Jon, Ali, Asa, and Tamara, thank you, and we will see you next week.